So thank you very much. Find a seat, and we're ready to begin. I'm David Schilling, the Senior Program Director at the Interface Center on Corporate Responsibility that's been engaged with the leadership group from the beginning. Before we begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Celeste Kohleveld, who is a partner here at Clifford Chance, and we'd love to get a really solid welcome from you.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to oblige on that one. Welcome to Clifford Chance for your program today on responsible recruiting. As David mentioned, I'm a partner here in the New York office. I'm in litigation, and I am also the pro bono coordinator on the litigation front in the New York office. So I know on that side we do a lot of work with sustainable development goals, access to justice, so I think that this type of work that we're doing on the hosting you all here slots right into that kind of theme for Clifford Chance. We're happy to have you here. We hope you have a wonderful program. We're sorry that Ray Lindsay and Steve Nicholsberg, who have partnered with you in the past, aren't available today, but they send their best regards and also wish you a wonderful conference. So thank you very much. Welcome to Clifford Chance.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Celeste. Let's see, Bibi Hernandez is here. We want to thank you as well, because you actually did the work. You really helped us get organized here, and I know the staff of Clifford Chance has really been tremendous in getting us started today. So it's wonderful to see each of you in the room. We have about over 150 that have registered to come in by phone, and I want to welcome them. I don't think you can see us, but the people I'm seeing here in the audience are looking great. Everybody is really, really looking good, and I'm assuming you are as well. But it's really wonderful to have an opportunity to have the leadership group for responsible recruitment in this kind of setting where we have been in a lot of different settings. In Europe, et cetera, but last couple of days in D.C., we really got to work to, okay, where are we after 3.5 years, right? What do we really need to be doing to move the agenda? And then yesterday talking to some of the government officials that are working on these issues and help to coordinate a lot more. But the theme, the importance of responsible recruitment in assessing modern slavery risk is right down the alley for investors. And I think for investors who are here, some of whom have been very active on this issue, others are coming in and really looking at, okay, what is our responsibility? And we'll hear more about that. But I do feel like there's no question that there's an association now between the exploitative recruitment practices and forced labor. That's established. Ensuring responsible recruitment, ensuring that no worker in any supply chain pays the cost of recruitment is a mammoth task. And that task requires business, it requires government, it requires non-governmental organizations, it certainly requires trade unions, and especially workers from the base, but also investors. So I think the key here is to be thinking about the issue in terms of how the various roles and responsibilities of each can align to the extent that some good momentum actually can hit like a tipping point. We're not there yet. And if we ask workers that question who are still paying fees, they know we're not there yet. But the leadership group, I think, has been really important. Now 15 companies, the IOM, the ILO, Verite, Migrant Forum in Asia, which is a critical group of foreign migrant worker organizations across Asia, and the ICCR. And it's really taking that one employer pays principle and embedding it, not just in policy, but in practice. And we'll be describing that later. But in the process of doing that throughout supply chains, it's really critical that we build a sustainable ethical recruitment base that is so tied up to the meeting of the Sustainable Development Goal, 8.7, which, Kevin, you had a lot to do with. But it really looks at how do we eliminate forced labor, child labor, human trafficking as a part of the Sustainable Development Goals. Just a couple of notes. One, usually when we gather like this, we're under Chatham House rule. Not today. Part of it is we have many people coming in by phone, so really feel free to say whatever you want, but it'll be on the record. So, and then number two, certainly if you're a tweeter, ethical tweeter, we encourage you to tweet. But now it's my privilege to introduce my colleague, Sarah Blackwell, who is the Associate Director of the initiative we started, a couple of years ago. But Sarah is with the Investor Alliance for Human Rights. Sarah.
Thanks so much, David. And many thanks again from me as well to Clifford Chance for so graciously hosting us this morning. Really timely and important and proud to say very well attended event in person and virtually. So as David mentioned, my name is Sarah Blackwell, and I'm Associate Director with the Investor Alliance for Human Rights, which is an initiative of ICCR. And we're a collective action platform for responsible investment that is grounded in respect for people's fundamental rights. We're a membership-based organization. Our membership is currently comprised of 170 institutional investors running the full gambit, from asset owners to asset managers. And collectively, they currently represent around $4 trillion in US dollars of assets under management and a total of about 18 countries. We work hand in hand in everything we do with civil society and other allies with the aim of ensuring that our work in the financial space is grounded in and informed by the lived experiences of rights holders and those that work with them. At the Investor Alliance, we support our members in moving beyond voluntary investor activism and advocacy to an approach that centers on investor responsibility and accountability. We do this by developing and road testing concrete tools for diverse investor types, working with diverse asset classes to practically implement their own human rights due diligence. We aim to scale business respect for human rights by equipping the finance ecosystem with the know-how on human rights. Because, as I'm sure many of you would agree, without investors of all sizes prioritizing people and not just profit, we unfortunately won't get as far as we need to be in ensuring dignity for workers and all rights holders impacted by business, including in the context of responsible recruitment, our focus today. So coming from this angle of investor responsibility, I'd like to help frame today's discussion by proposing a call to action for the main audience for this briefing, investors. I propose calling them to action and thinking critically and creatively about how you might put your responsibility to respect human rights into practice. We, of course, need more supply chain transparency across sectors to actualize responsible recruitment across the globe. But this space isn't new. As David just rightfully pointed out, we know that modern slavery risks and impacts are there for investors, particularly when most portfolios cover so many sectors. So I would therefore ask investors to avoid analysis paralysis, if you will, and get to the doing of what playing a meaningful role in preventing, mitigating, and addressing those risks and impacts looks like. This means continuing to utilize, but actually going beyond traditional shareholder investor tools to holistically steer investment decision-making in responsible ways. So I'll just offer a couple examples here, developing your own human rights policies and governance systems within your institutions as investors that are then embedded across your business relationships. If you're an asset owner, how are you engaging your asset managers on these issues? One example. Also propose joining collective efforts. We have a great example in Know the Chain's investor statement that now has about $5 trillion in assets under management signed on, calling for companies to address forced labor in their supply chain. These collective creative uses of leverage are the leadership that we're looking for. Other examples include using your investor voice to support mandatory human rights due diligence conversations and other standard setting developments. And then a last example, building real long-term relationships with allies to bring the rights holder perspective to your work. So we're fortunate today to have many experts giving us their insights and perspectives. And I would, my proposal is throughout the conversation, we come back to this critical question. How can investors be leaders and transform their own business practices in concrete and comprehensive ways to support responsible recruitment and seriously tackle the crisis of modern day slavery? And if you haven't already, join the Investor Alliance. We're here to help you out in that endeavor. So with that, I'll hand it back to David to continue the program. Thanks.
Sarah, thanks so much. Kevin Highland, I'm asking you to come up. We're very, very fortunate as a leadership group for responsible recruitment to have chair the quality of Kevin Highland as a person and as a kind of an institutional sort of force within the anti-trafficking movement. First as in law enforcement, working especially in London with the human trafficking unit, but also the first UK independent anti-trafficking commissioner from 2014 to 2018. He also is doing so much in so many different areas, including working with a whole coalition of faith groups on this issue. And of course, so much of the ICCR, membership is very aligned, coming out of a faith tradition, values tradition, and getting faith leaders from various places, including I remember there's one faith leader you've been working with in the Vatican. Pope Francis, which I think is a really good choice to get more global perspective. But Kevin, we want to hear you and to help us get into this program. Thanks.
Good morning, and thank you, David, for that introduction. And thank you all for attending this morning, both here in person and those listening online. And to Clifford Chance for hosting this important event here in New York. And I realize how important this is when today I'm aware that we've actually got people as far away as Australia who are listening in. That's how important and how global this issue really is. But as global trade and manufacturing continue to rise, the demand for migrant workers is seen as vital in some business models, but it's often relating to those who are on low pay or who conduct low-skilled work. And their work is varied. It can be in construction, agriculture, fishing, domestic workers, factory workers. These are just some examples of where there is a high demand for migrant workers. And for many of those people who work away from home, it is a crucial element and an economic necessity for them and their families. According to the World Bank, in 2018, overall global remittances grew 10% to $689 billion US dollars, including $528 billion US dollars, which is almost equivalent to the entire US government spend on procurement, which was sent to developing countries. So this benefit of these remittances shows how migrant work brings benefit to communities, to families, and this is often the basics of food, health, and education. There are, however, risks attached to working as a migrant worker, as unscrupulous employees or agents and employers seek opportunities to exploit sometimes people who are desperate for work. And it is at the point of recruitment where one of the highest risks of exploitation or vulnerability can start. Simply put, where a worker charge fee is incurred. The mere fact that a fee is charged to the worker themselves can create a debt that from the start places an individual on a pathway to exploitation. And these fees, as we know, can vary from a few weeks' pay to many months or even years. But the situation this creates means that paying for accommodation, food and other costs either become a debt, a loan, but they result in somebody living in shocking conditions that are both inhumane and severely detrimental to an individual's health. So to counter these unjust recruitment regimes, the Institute of Human Rights and Business formed the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment, a body of multilateral businesses, UN agencies and NGOs who have set a target of the elimination of recruitment fees and creating what has now become more widely used as the employer pays principle. The fees that are transferred to a worker can vary and at what point they are incurred. Firstly, there's pre-departure, such as visa fees, travel, medical expenses, for example. Secondly, in transit, such as flights or coaches or border fees. And thirdly, on arrival, including orientation fees, paying for equipment, medical checks, or loans with high interest for having incurred other fees. These are some of the costs that either alone or collectively can be charged. So this is unacceptable that somebody who is embarking on low-paid work starts that job with a high fee just for the pleasure of getting the job. To better understand and map the journey of a worker from recruitment to the end of a contract, the Institute of Human Rights and Business, in partnership with governments, business and unions, developed and agreed darker principles for migration and dignity. It's a 10-point framework for understanding and addressing the challenges facing migrant workers at every stage of their migration cycle. The first principle, an important principle, is that no fees are charged to the migrant worker. The remaining principles are that all migrant workers' contracts are clear and transparent. Policies and procedures are inclusive. No migrant worker's passport or identity documents are retained. Wages are paid regularly, directly, and importantly, on time. The right to workers' representation is respected. Working conditions are safe and decent. Living conditions are safe and decent. Access to remedy is provided. Freedom to change employment respected, safe, and timely return guaranteed. I don't think any of those 10 principles is asking too much. The Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment explains itself as a coalition of leading international companies and expert organisations committed to eradicating the payment of recruitment fees by workers in their supply chains. In some ways, this may seem very straightforward, but with complex supply chains, some with tens of thousands of suppliers in multiple tiers of chains, it can be argued this is a most challenging task. Added to this is, in some areas, it is a cultural norm for fees to be charged, even to the extent that where there are no fees, there is suspicion that something may be wrong. But the very purpose of leadership is to address challenges, change the norms, and, importantly, bring results. If the status quo is accepted, then this is not leadership, and it's not leadership that is less necessary. If we want to remain at the status quo, it's about a management process. And we have to understand management and leadership are two different things that are often confused. To achieve this, it needs businesses, governments, unions, and international agencies to understand the premise that the employer pays and no worker recruitment fees are made by anyone. This needs to become an integral part of how business is conducted. As I said, remittances in 2018 were $689 billion US dollars, and 528 of that going to developing nations. It is unknown what the figure is that is lost through recruitment fees. But imagine if all remittances were available. The global world provides around 153 billion US dollars a year in development aid. And the ILO estimates that human trafficking and the exploitation of forced labor generates 150 billion US dollars a year to the criminals who conduct this. So the financial benefits around making sure remittances are available are enormous. Firstly, if that were the case, some of the 150 billion earned by the criminals would be wiped out because they wouldn't be able to make money from the remittances they take from those who become victim. And secondly, the amount of money that would end up in developing nations would significantly increase, therefore adding enormously to the 153 billion that we currently spend on trying to develop our world. So leadership is critical to create a time where compromises or the market drivers that accept, either knowingly or unwittingly, for worker fees to be charged, to be eradicated by policy, legislation, and importantly, through consequences. We talk about consequences as if they are something we should ignore. But in your business world, there are consequences if the quality is poor, if the product is poor, or even if delivery is delayed. Why do we not have such consequences when it comes to the most important aspect of the value chain, human lives and human dignity? In many ways, I often ask, has our world lost its moral compass? The disposable culture now includes disposable people, something that the IHRB leadership group is determined to change. There are many international commitments that seek to end exploitation and bring equality. These are in UN protocols, EU directives, the Council of Europe, and many international agreements. Importantly, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals we all agree to internationally, are there to strive for a better world. And of course, Goal 8 is focused on decent work. And as David said, Target 8.7 is about the eradication of human trafficking, modern slavery, and child labour. But the time has come for us to move from words or commitments to actions. These goals will reach their 5th anniversary in September, a third of the way through their mandate. And yet we are nowhere near 33% of doing the work. In fact, in many cases, we may have gone backwards. But what is the human story we're talking about? We can talk about this in dollars, pounds, or euros. We can talk about it about ambitions of being market leaders. But the human story that this relates to. The man kept 16 years on a boat, charged fees to enter into that abusive lifestyle. 16 years living in hell. Only last year, people paid large recruitment fees to go to Europe from Vietnam for jobs mainly in the United Kingdom. 39 of them were found dead in a lorry, froze to death during a terrible journey. One of them, before she died, a young girl in her early 20s, sent a text to her father in Vietnam saying how sorry she was that she'd taken the risk. Or women, some that I have met, who live in domestic servitude, having paid fees to agencies, ending up living under a sink in London, only to be taken out to do the cleaning or to be raped. Or fishing vessels in Europe or my home country of Ireland, where people end up on fishing vessels for many weeks, many years. One man with injuries, whose wife was pregnant, was not allowed to return home. Then when her baby died, he still was kept in shocking conditions, without pay, without any dignity. This is happening millions of times around our world, and the current estimate is 40 million people in situations of modern slavery. So we need to act. And one thing that we can do collectively is show the leadership to eradicate these fees that can often be the start of a process that can end in losing a life. Not just damaging a life, not just an uncomfortable business position, not just short-changing your wages, but losing your life. But the reverse of that, if we do eradicate these fees, is a world where those in the developing nations can earn more, can develop, their situations can become better, and most people like to stay at home. We have got the opportunity, if we come together, to achieve that objective, just by showing the leadership to eradicate these fees and achieving our target. Being someone who originates from Ireland and lives there, many of you will know George Bernard Shaw, who was a famous playwright. He made a quote that the reasonable man adapts to the world, whereas the unreasonable man or person demands change. So therefore, change is only achieved by the unreasonable person. Well, on the issue of recruitment fees, I think our request is very reasonable. But I think the behaviour that happens to those who suffer because these fees are there is very unreasonable. So I think it's fair that we should be unreasonable and demand that this change happens, so that those who suffer as a result of this premise can have a great life. I think the people in this room, as committed to this issue, I think business can make a better world. I think collectively, business, governments and NGOs can achieve many of the SDGs, but only by doing it through leadership, only by demanding what is necessary and making sure that we have equality for everyone, which is what the SDGs are about, including that fisherman, that domestic worker, that young child who we will never meet because they live in poverty on the other side of the world. Thank you very much. I just wanted now to also recognise that we have a new addition to the leadership group, which is PepsiCo. And it's wonderful that businesses of this size and household brands, which a number of the companies are joining this mission, because it's by their commitment, their leadership, and their ability to change things that we will achieve this. It was great to see, we were in Washington, D.C. for a couple of days, and it was great to see Jaron at those meetings and to see the commitment. Having Coke and Pepsi in the same room was great, and did create the two corners, the red corner and the blue corner, like a wrestling match. But it was great to see them join together in something really positive around this. So we're delighted to have PepsiCo as a member of this leadership group. Thank you very much. Great.
So the first panel is going to be looking at the whole question of what can corporate action do in terms of this issue, and we've got amazing people, really. I'd ask you to come up. So Greg Priest, right? Marcella Manubens, Killian Moot, Adam Kanzer. I'll just quickly introduce the panel. Each one of the persons will be doing like a PowerPoint, which will help, particularly those on the phone, to be able to really see what is taking place as well. Which might mean that some of you might want to sit in front while the others are being shown the PowerPoint. But I feel like this is a critical panel to kind of lay a foundation as to how, companies in the leadership group are addressing some of the issues that Kevin described, and then we'll get into in more detail. I think before starting the panel, just a couple of introductions. Most of people know John Morrison, who's the CEO of the Institute for Human Rights in Business that acts as the secretariat for this group. Francis House is here, also with the Institute. Neil, who is in the back there, is the person to really contact, who does the migrant worker program for the Institute. But I'd also like to introduce Josh Sinner, the CEO of ICCR. Next month I have a job evaluation, and I really felt like this needed to happen. But okay, let's start. And I think what we're going to do, have questions at the end, and then I'll bring that in. And of course, those on the phone will be doing questions and thinking about your questions, but put them in the box. Put them in the question box on the WebEx. So let's start with Greg Priest from IKEA, who's been on the steering group of the leadership group since the beginning. We've known each other a long time through the Global Social Compliance Program, et cetera, a company that's been doing a lot, and we're really interested in hearing your intervention here.
And David, I would just like to say what a fantastic job you do in supporting the leadership group and in all your work. And yes, thank you.
Put the mic a little closer.
Yes, closer. Yes, thank you. Great. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today and for coming out this morning. It's, as Kevin highlighted, is such an important topic. Great to see the enthusiasm and commitment to support in the change. I am working, Greg Priest, I'm the head of social impact and human rights for the Inter-IKEA group. Hopefully many of you know IKEA. We are a global home furnishings retailer with retailers throughout the world, a supply chain that matches that throughout the world. We do all of our own product design, development, sourcing. We have an industry group as well, retailers I mentioned, and a vision that says to create a better everyday life for the many people. And that's where we begin today with that, through a business, but also a social mission as well. When we started coming into this, the topic of this issue was really, I would say in the 2005 to 2008, around there. We've had a long-standing code of conduct, which we call IWAY, which is our supplier code of conduct. And through my talk, I'm going to point out a few things that, as investors, what could you look for in a company? What are they doing well or not well, or what gives you some indications of areas? And codes of conducts and auditing processes, due diligence processes in that way, quite often get a bad rap these days. And another audit's another thing. But in defense a little bit, I'll say that without a good, robust auditing system and code of conduct and one that works well, the issue wouldn't have come up as early as it did for us. And in the beginning, it was very much around seeing migrant workers in factories, and the issues that we were facing then were, holding of passports, documents, those types of things. So in revisions of codes of conduct and that, we started working with, how do we face that? And then through the process, we realized that we needed to get closer to the people and, what is their stories? What was really happening? And that's when the first issues of really these fees and charges and debt came up. And then the more you explore, the deeper you get, and the more you see the totality of the picture. And we've listed some here. of some of the topics, other topics outside of just fees that we found, and you find it's global in nature. There is really, and I'll probably underline this a few times today, and Kevin did a good job of that, that there is no industry, no area in the world that is not impacted by this. Quite often we think of Asia when we're thinking of this, or the Middle East, but it is everywhere. So if there's ever a company that says it's not, we don't have an impact, the red flags go up. Within that, we quickly realized that we knew a little, but we didn't know a lot. A simple recruitment process is what we knew. You had a person, and I'm going to say a person, not a worker at the beginning, because as we heard before, these are people, that want to create a better everyday life for themselves, their families, provide for their families. The first dream is not to go thousands of miles around the world to work somewhere else for years and years and send money back. You want to stay at home. But because of circumstances, economic and others, you have to. And it isn't just a worker. It's a mother, father, son, daughter, uncle that is going away, usually with dreams of their own, but for the family, goes. You have, of course, the sub-agents, recruitment agencies, all of that, and this is what we knew. But we also knew through the stories that there was much more to it. We needed to really do a deep dive and a wide dive to actually find out what was this, how did this work, and then we also knew that we didn't have all the answers or very many answers at all. So it was to find some friends and support and partners to help us do this. We had early conversations with Neil and Francis at IHRB, and using the DACA principles, saying, okay, how do we get farther into this? And then we also decided to do a really deep mapping, starting with the people who are affected, the workers in the factories and retail operations, and diving into that. So another thing to look for, who do companies partner with? Who are they working with? Who are their critical friends? If you don't see those, again, some red flags go up. So what we did, we started at the factories, at retail units, with people, workers, and started asking them their stories. Where did you come from? What was the process? How did you do it? And from there, went all the way back to their villages, met their relatives, their friends, family, the recruitment agent that they started with, and followed the whole process through. We ended up working with 280 people, workers, across 8 countries, numerous amounts of recruitment agents, speaking with them, who were very open and transparent with the process. We talked to governments and, of course, our suppliers and service providers. And I think, the connection to people, again, as Kevin said, so important. I mean, really finding out, putting a face, a story to the process, to the name. So what we went from is a very simple 4 boxes to this, which is a very simplified version of what we found. The process that many workers went through. And people who, really are vulnerable, not knowledgeable of what should be expected, what's the norm, and it becomes the norm of having all of these fees. But it's almost in every step there's an extra additional fee, which is not needed, quite often not legal, but is expected, and that's just the way it is. So some of the outcomes of this, and then each one of these boxes comes with a fee and probably some inefficiency in it. So if you're thinking from a business perspective, this process is extremely inefficient, ineffective, and wasteful. Remittances, costs, and at the end of the day, you're probably not getting a really motivated worker who is matching the skills you need in the factory. You're getting somebody very stressed, very worried, unsure, and vulnerable even more. A worst case scenario. We heard some of the costs before, and of course there are a lot of costs in the selection process and the recruitment process. trainings, quote unquote trainings, all kinds of fees for visas and passports that are excessive, more than anyone else would have to pay. The transit costs, of course. But the one that also came out very strongly was the legal fees that are imposed in receiving countries by governments. Quite often excessive in the totality of everything else that was there. And to be clear, also the amount of corruption in the process of providing amounts of recruitment to agencies and kickbacks to officials that way. So important not to forget that. Yeah. So, oops, don't do that. Uh-oh, I just caused a... Let's see. Good. There we go. So what do you do with it? As a company, of course, continuing to strengthen the work internally, codes of conduct, but then also supporting your suppliers in awareness. How do you do this? Because there isn't an industry out there at the time to support it. There isn't a recruitment industry. How do you support initiatives like IRIS, which is the International Organization for Migration, developing a code of conduct and around good, responsible recruitment? How do we support that? How do you create the understanding within the business to actually make this part of the business, make this part of contracts and ways of working? And with that, another thing to look for, I guess you would say, is a long-term relationship with your suppliers and service providers. This can't happen with transient 6-month relationships. It has to be a long-term thing. So I'm going to leave it there because I know we're going to get into a lot of other questions, but just a short overview. And then ending with, we still have a lot of work to do ourselves. We've scratched the surface, but actually getting to remittances, all of the things that need to happen is a lot to do. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Greg. And now we'll turn to Marcella Manubens from Unilever. Used to be a PDH here in New York City. You know, we were child
You
laborers
hold the bastion,
together,
right?
weren't we?
Please.
So, but we love to get your perspective from a different sector and what you've been doing as well.
Okay, very good. Can you hear me all? Yeah? So I'm Marcella Manubens. I'm the Global VP for Integrated Social Sustainability. What it means at Unilever, when I came to Unilever, is to really drive the human rights agenda and the social impact globally. So David asked me 3-4 questions to switch gears and to explain to you. So what is your company like? Can you explain to us the complexities very succinctly? How do you integrate this to your business? How do you identify, have you identified any issues and what you do about it? So if we can go to the next one.
You're in charge.
I thought someone was managing for me. What did you do?
I'm extremely good at trying to screw it up for you. Okay, there we go.
Okay, the next one. This is the one?
Yeah, don't press the one I'm pushing.
So we are a global company. I mean, we have 3 primary food sort of categories of business: home care, personal care, food and refreshments. Probably you have used some of our, products every day. We have, 2.5 billion consumers every day using our products. We have a very large turnover of 51 billion. We have 155,000 people, direct employees who make things happen every day, and through our extended supply chain is over 60,000 suppliers in more or less touch points in 190 countries where we have some kind of business. The footprint that we have is tremendous. And when we look into the social impact of people who are engaged in our business every single day, we estimated that is approximately over 2 million people directly involved in our business. So what has been our journey. What has been a company like Unilever? What have we done? How do we have a program? How do we operate this? So it was in 2010 that the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, you know it, is our engine for responsible and sustainable business, was launched. I came on board in 2013, and my mandate was to really establish the body of work that I'm specialized with. And we created a very simple strategy, three-phased. The first phase was to wire the organization. It's part of the answer to David's question, how do you do it? We wire the organization to be fit for purpose, meaning we have not only the values, but we translate into a specific policies and actions that we needed to do. The second phase of that strategy, very simple, build capacity. Greg, in his presentation highlighted the lack of, knowledge in his findings that there is across the operation. So how do we build the capacity internally and with the people that we do business, and how do we implement all that effectively? And the third one, very simply, was from move to do no harm to do good, right? If we are looking, much of the conversations that we have is tackle, unfortunately, about how do I eradicate a bad practice. But how does it look like when we flip the coin and we say, what good looks like? And that is certainly for me what I wake up every day and try to drive to. So that's what we did at Unilever. One key operating principle of what we put in place was transparency. And we were the first company who used the UNGP's reporting framework for a human rights standalone document. I'm very proud to be leading in Know Your Chain, or Know the Chain. And much of the work, yeah.
No, you're still. Yeah.
and the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and much of the work that we have been doing. So what this trajectory that we put in front of you try to demonstrate is that it wasn't an event. It's not a program. It's not addressing an issue, but it's how do we embed it. And I said that in 2014 we expanded the USLP, creating really three different distinctive, pillars of actions, meaning the ambition with very specific goals. The first pillar was fairness in the workplace, right? It's all about human rights. The second pillar was opportunity for women. It was all about the economic and empowerment of women, and we anchored in the tripod of rights, skills to succeed, and opportunities. And I may say that in 2013 we addressed what is now known as the Me Too, because we learned from our own operations, and you cannot really be included in the economy if you fear for your safety, right? So fundamental principle, opportunity for women as really creating the context and the conditions for someone to really be able to operate, not just to be in the room. And the skills to succeed was quite critical. And the third pillar was inclusive business models, is looking into how are we really develop the next generation of business right now. I mean, there's a lot going in, no plastic, less plastic, no waste. And business are being created, so how do you embed at that moment much of the principles that we want to do? How can we make sure that what Greg spoke about in those new models do not take place? In an effort to really address and sort of the question that David, you started with, multi-stakeholder activity. We certainly work with our unions. We meet twice a year, and we address specifically the issues that we are talking today. We have created a sustainable employment work stream since many years back. We were a founding member of this leadership because there's the only way that we are going to be able to join with critical friends and with like-minded business and with people who push us to think differently and to look from a different perspective to really bring that sea of change that we need to do. And we work, for instance, we connected our work with the Consumer Good Forum, where we led the establishment of the ambition to eradicate forced labor from the supply chains. And we linked the principles that distinguish the Institute, the DACA principles, and we linked that activity. So that is, with that, what I'm saying is that it was embedded. So we didn't wake up to this. But it was interesting for us. I mean, I'm going to go quickly to the next so we can move then later on to your questions. So David's third question was salient issues. Do you have, is it in there? How do you determine, I mean, how do you address this? So because we created, one of our ambitions within the USLP was to embed the UN guiding principles and to address all these issues, we need to determine what we are known as salient issues. Issues that they are really important to the right holders, people that we interact every single day. Remember I said the over 2 million individuals that participate economically are linked to our business, right? And what we anticipated in 2013 was, it wasn't really anticipated. In the apparel industry, we dealt since the 90s, right? If you remember Saipan, that's how I met you, David. So it was to see that trend, that with the economic, social, political crisis that everybody is experiencing around the world, there is this increasing borderless workforce. People just want a good living for their families, and they are moving from point A to point B, looking for stability and economic growth and good conditions. And Kevin, you highlighted many of the cases that were, unfortunately, the worst scenario, what we are trying to prevent. So because we saw that compounded with the automation trend, we realized that the contract labor, migrant labor, was going to come to an intersection that we needed to address much more ahead of the game. So we established internally, we certainly established a whole set of what we call golden rules to make sure that the workers in that employment would, in fact, be protected, would not be vulnerable. And as Greg said, I mean, we are in the infancy of the work that we are doing, unfortunately, because still there is so much to do collectively. Even if I succeed in my work, in my four walls of the company, if we succeed in our four walls and we don't work together with all of you, I think that we are moving the problem to someone else. If I don't, again, if I don't work, if I do a good job in our company by everything that we do, and I'm not working with all of you, with the people on the phone, with civil society, NGO, etc., we are simply moving the problem to someone else's. So the importance and criticality of what we do together. Couple of more minutes. Salient, so maybe salient issues, and you said how we determine. Here is the question that David asked me, which I think is critical. So do you identify issues? Yes, we do. What do you do about it? And here we have some examples that I thought were quite interesting to highlight. Turkey is a corridor. Workers and people are escaping, very complex zones and conflict zones, going through and engage in agriculture. So we work together with the Fair Labor Association, have done a work that is started around the hazelnuts. Well, it's not one commodity, it's every commodity. It's agriculture, it's worker, it's the conditions, as Kevin highlighted. So working with them, working with the stakeholders, and including the government to make sure that we have, the better conditions in the country. I cannot see even my own notes. We drove action. We engaged with many and within the leadership group on capacity building, right? On making sure that we engage with the suppliers. In many cases, those suppliers do not know what is happening before they hire the agency and they, in fact, engage the workers coming. So we need to create that. We work in, one of the most complex industries. There are many, but it's the trucking and transport industry. When you look into, for instance, the scenario in Europe and workers coming from Asia being hired by a Polish company with a Polish pay slip, Polish salary, and being working, never see Poland, and be working, never speak the language, certainly, and be working in Spain or France or UK where they cannot afford even to eat properly. That and how and the models that we have, auditing doesn't work. You had to work together with the voices of the workers and unions, etc. And we are piloting that work. I know that David is asking me to cut it out because otherwise Killian doesn't have much time. But this is, there are many examples that we can talk. But the most important element for me that I want to convey to you is A, has to be part of your thinking at the business decision-making part. B, has to be transparent. Transparent is an enabler, right? It's what Killian is going to hold me accountable for. And we need to engage all the stakeholders, including the voices of the workers. So I'll pass it to you.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks so much. I mean, it's easier for me to get someone else to stop talking than myself. I have a real hard time. So people that know me, but
We
so
always
I'm,
have the problem.
hypocrisy is endemic. But Killian, it's so important to have you on the panel because hearing from two companies that are digging in, looking at all the questions. How do you start? What are the capacity, et cetera. But know the chain, of course, we, as ICCR, have used it a lot. And it's such an entry point, particularly with companies that are not global companies, but they're some of the suppliers, and they're really starting out. But, give us a sense of, because really now, third year?
Coming up.
Yeah, coming up, and there have been the rankings, which is one thing, the information that's the other. But the role that, just assessment of where we are from a benchmarking perspective that I think will help set, a table that can prompt some more conversation.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, David, and thank you, Marcel, for your comments. A few things that you said that I really want to echo. This piece about collaboration and addressing these systemic problems really does require all of us collectively working together. And I want to praise the leadership group for really helping to create that capacity and that table for us to work together on some of these deep-seated industry issues that exist. And for stating, employer pays is an important principle to embrace and to implement. And that is kind of the starting point, helps start the conversation within corporations. And I would say the same thing with investors, right? Having a statement or embracing the fact that you as an investor care about this issue is a starting point, and it's really important. And for those of you who have not yet signed the Know the Chain investor statement, we have 5 trillion of investors under management who are supporting that statement. There's some of you in the room who have not signed it, but I think it's a really good entry point to even start the conversation within your own institutions about why this issue is important. So signing that statement, it's a real strong signal that you can send to all the companies that you might own that this issue is something that they need to take seriously as well.
And actually, parenthetically, Killian's having a job evaluation next month as well.
Exactly.
And if you can get to 6 trillion, I think you get a bonus. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So just for background, for those of you who are not familiar with Know the Chain or with my organization, Humanity United, I work for Humanity United. We're a private foundation that's been working on this issue for over a decade, working with companies, working with workers, importantly, really elevating what we feel like are the most pressing issues and approaches, and increasingly working with investors because we understand investors have a responsibility in this process to engage more deeply and thoroughly on issues that lead to why individuals are in situations of exploitation. So what Know the Chain is essentially is a benchmark in which we're evaluating the largest publicly traded companies in 3 of the highest risk sectors: food and beverage, ICT, high tech, and footwear and apparel. And what we have done is we've developed a framework that includes 7 themes in which we feel like through evaluation and engagement with those companies, we can get a holistic understanding of what that company is currently doing and what they need to do to address the risks of forced labor in their supply chains. And that ranges from the highest level of commitment all the way down to actually remedying abuses when it occurs. We provide that information publicly to investors and to companies themselves. We rank the companies against each other to provide a context for where we are at in the industry and where progress is necessary and what leadership really looks like. We do this every other year. We're coming up this year on a benchmark year, so we will be again benchmarking these three sectors. As a part of our engagement process, we look at information companies currently have available, and then we also give them the opportunity to disclose new information. In the years off where we're not doing the benchmarking, we do engagement with stakeholders to help strengthen and improve the methodology. I think a real fundamental aspect of leadership is that it's not static, it's continuous, right? And so we are trying to continue to identify what leadership looks like. And so as a part of that, we're constantly surveying, discussing, really better defining what it actually means to implement the policies and process that we're talking about to eradicate forced labor from global supply chains. I'm not going to go into our entire methodology. If you're interested in how we assess companies, you can go to knowthechain.org, and all our information is there. Again, it's all publicly available. We provide this to investors to help inform how to do engagements or how to help inform how to appropriately integrate this information into your investment decision making. That data, again, is completely available and open and online. I did want to kind of take a step back and just focus on recruitment of all of our 7 themes. These are a few kind of graphs or statistics from some of our findings. One of the major aspects that we focus on is around having a policy that prohibits workers from being charged recruitment fees. 41% of the 119 companies that we assessed in 2018 had a policy that prohibited workers from paying recruitment fees. 59% did not, right? So overall, we still don't have a majority of companies that we looked at, right? Still just a snapshot, did not yet have a policy in place. Further to this point, there's a real disparity still between policy and practice. Only 8% of the companies we evaluated provided evidence that fees had been reimbursed. I think this is a really important statistic and something for investors to pay attention to. In absence of a verifiable process that ensures workers are not charged fees, the closest way a company can validate that they have an effective implementation process is by stating publicly that they had to remediate a violation against that policy. I think if we're all in this room today, I think we're all likely acknowledging that workers are being charged fees. That is where the starting point should be. The starting point should be that in this system that is broken, workers, particularly migrant workers and others who are at risk, are having to pay to get a job. If we start from that premise, then it's really, really important to have a policy first. But secondly, it's really, really important that you're demonstrating that you're implementing that policy. If you're not able to demonstrate that you've reimbursed fees, i.e. there was a violation against that policy, or you're not able to disclose the proactive steps that you're taking to address and ensure workers are not charged in the first place, then you might not be actually effectively implementing that policy. That's the wrong button.
It's a correct kind of action. Do you know how to solve it? He knows how to solve it.
Okay. Technical.
I've all of a sudden become different.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Greg has a new job too.
Yeah,
You learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. So another aspect of recruitment that we look at that we think is important is a policy that prohibits the retention of worker passports, right? So this is a more encouraging stat that we're seeing that over half of the companies that we've looked at have adopted a policy that specifically ensures that workers' passports are not retained. Again, kind of the disparity between policy and implementation, the support for ethical recruitment in their supply chains, only about 15% of companies that we surveyed in 2018 had essentially demonstrated a capacity to do that. The good news, we do feel like we are traveling in the right direction. We just are not going fast enough. To get to that goal that we set out as a group by 2026, we are going to eliminate this. We are not going fast enough to get there. Okay? We've done our benchmarks twice. We're doing again this year in 2020. So in 2016, when we did this the first time, 21 of the companies that we evaluated, it was a smaller cohort for 2016, had a no fees policy, right? In 2018, 28 had a no fees policy. So we're seeing some forward momentum. And that, while we're not done with the research, I can say that that number is going to increase as well, right? Mm-hmm. Now getting to evidence, right? In 2016, 3 companies had demonstrate that they had reimbursed, they'd been required to reimburse fees, or that fees had been reimbursed in some way. And then in 2018, 9 had done so. As a part of our methodology improvement process, strengthening process, this year we incorporated elements that relate to proactive approach, right? We heard feedback from companies, hey, it's not just about reimbursement, it's also about proactive approach to ensure that fees aren't charged in the first place, right? So aspects that we've incorporated this year in terms of proactive approach includes a company being able to demonstrate they understand the recruitment channels that a worker might come through. That demonstration from IKEA was a great example of that. And then mapping all the various costs that specific workers might be charged. Another proactive example. I will say, while that has been incorporated in, I'm not optimistic that a lot of companies are going to disclose that they have taken those steps. Research is not done. We still have a lot to do. I'm not optimistic that that has occurred. I will say that the initial research is showing that more companies are disclosing that they're reimbursing fees. But what we really need to have a conversation with, and I think this is really what is so great about this leadership opportunity, is for us to continue to push what it means to be a leader, right? This is an old cliche, but it's lonely at the top, essentially, is what they say about leadership, right? And so if you're a leader in a company and you're using your voice, that is a really, really strong step to go to your colleagues and say, these are issues we need to address. But we need to continue to push the envelope, and that means pushing all of us together. That means taking on feedback as NGOs when we know what effective processes are working, making sure that we're advocating for those to be integrated into better approaches. Mm-hmm. But it also means, as companies, to continue to push your peers and your own internal process to be improved. And finally, it also means, if you're an investor, doing the same, embracing this approach, possibly consider signing our statement. That sends a strong signal that you as an investor are taking this issue seriously as well for all of the companies that you might hold. And then it also provides you with information in terms of how you can initiate, engage, and incorporate some of this information into your investment decision making.
Great, thanks so much. I think that's a helpful perspective. And partly it helps to drive not just information collection, but I think behavior change. As investors get engaged and involved, NGOs get engaged and involved. And I'm looking around the audience, there's so many who are pushing for more information. I see Transparentum here. That's an important ally in this work, going very, very deep into investigations that help to encourage and move companies in the right direction. So with the Know the Chain, with Transparentum, with a range of assessments, with some of the withhold release orders that we're now seeing through the government. So at any rate, I'm not a speaker, I'm a moderator, but...
you cut in our time.
I know. But so, Adam Kanzer, you're the lone investor on this panel. But it'd be great to get a clear picture of a firm like BNP Paribas Asset Management, how you think about these issues. I know there's some of the questions you have, but you've been engaging companies from Domini, that base, for like 20 years and have a good sense of where companies are and where they need to move and what helps to drive that. But it'd be great to hear your 7 minutes.
Sure.
No.
And I have to pause for a second because I just learned that David Schilling's not a speaker. So I have to sort of process that for a minute. So let me click the next slide. It's a very quick introduction to my firm, BNP Paribas Asset Management. We are the asset management arm of the French bank, with roughly 450 billion in assets under management. And we have had a commitment to sustainable investing since 2002. We're founding signatories to the PRI. And Just last year, we adopted a global sustainability strategy, which is published on our website. It's about a 40, 50-page document, which includes a commitment to incorporate ESG into all of our portfolios, all asset classes globally. And part of that commitment is built around what we call the 3 E's: the energy transition to a low carbon economy, environmental sustainability, and equality. And we see these as the prerequisites to a sustainable economic system. This is the future that we would like to build. And so human rights clearly falls under the pillar of equality. We also have within our stewardship work what we refer to as responsible business conduct. So we kind of look at that through the lens of the Global Compact and are looking at really kind of egregious violations of human rights, corruption, and environmental violations as well. And we exclude companies. We put companies on a watch list for further engagement as well. Those are really sort of the hardest cases. So why should investors care about this issue, and why should investors be focused and working on this issue? Because the leadership group is unfortunately the exception to the rule, and we need a lot more than $4 or $5 trillion supporting these commitments. So let me start with Milton Friedman. Yeah, it's always a great way to start the morning, isn't it? But so say what you will about Milton Friedman, and you will. But in a sense, he placed freely chosen employment at the heart of what makes a free market function. This statement is taken from his most famous essay from the New York Times Magazine, where he said that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Now, why is that the case? Why is it reasonable and just to trust the market to set prices and to essentially kind of set priorities for us? Because in an ideal free market, no individual can coerce any other. All cooperation is voluntary. All parties to such cooperation benefit, or they need not participate. So in a free market, the market reflects the intentions and the decisions of all participants, because all participants are autonomous and free and expressing their views. Can you imagine a market where consumers were coerced to buy certain products? We certainly wouldn't trust the price of those products. So we know that that's not the market that we work with. That's an ideal free market. We're pretty far away from that. So forced labor represents a market failure. And how can we trust a market to set prices and to accurately reflect the intentions of all participants if it's built on coercion and exploitation? The answer is we can't. It's broken. So if that's not a central core concern for investors, I don't know what is. The market that we rely on to provide value to our clients over time is broken. And that phrase, in an ideal free market, which is often, I think, glossed over, because what it essentially says is, I am telling you, I'm making an aspirational statement. I'm talking about almost a utopian vision. I'm not talking about reality. That little clause is something you need to work for. So I think we need to ask ourselves as investors, if that's the market that we want to see, it's going to require a lot more work from us. Because right now, the way the system works, it undermines the market's ability to function properly, and it undermines local economies. So a few kind of open questions for companies and for investors. So first, one reflection on Know the Chain that David and Kelly and I have talked about quite a bit, particularly in the tech sector, is that the best companies are sourcing from the worst companies. Why is that? And why is it our job as investors to fix that? I think that's a really hard question for the companies that we do recognize are leaders. They are, they've clearly proven it. But they are still sourcing from companies that really don't have a clue about these issues. And I know they don't have a clue about these issues because I've spoken to some of them. So we need to fix that. Now, when we talk to companies, what are we looking for? And it's, like all sustainability issues, I'm looking to understand that the company recognizes the issue, and they're working on the issue, and they're working on the systemic root causes of the issue. I don't like to hear that we've solved it. It's not a problem for us. That's a red flag. And we do hear that from time to time. So we don't expect perfection. We expect to see a company actively working on this and wrestling with the problem. So that means you do need to set the right policies, of course. But as Killian was saying, we need to see what's behind that policy. We need to see how it's being implemented. So how much disclosure is enough? Enough to give us a sense of confidence that you recognize the problem and that you're working on it, and absolutely disclose the reimbursements. Very few companies are doing that, and it's not necessarily the dollar figure that is material, or it's the fact that you're able to produce that dollar figure, because that tells me that there's a process that's working. David and I had a conversation with a company recently that said, well, why do we keep talking about money? Why is that the only solution to this problem, that we have to fix this by writing a check? Why are you always talking about writing a check? It's like, well, because you're stealing from your workers. And the only way to rectify that is to pay them. But so, we're still at the point of raising awareness and getting companies to understand that this is a real problem that is in their supply chains. So there's a blind spot there, and part of the blind spot is that phrase, in an ideal free market, because I think too many of us assume that that's the way the market actually functions. So why would I have to look at something? I know that's not the way the market works, right? Everybody is consented to be involved. For investors, we've got a lot of blind spots that prevents us from looking at these kinds of issues. I think materiality is one. It's difficult for investors to think about systemic risks, systemic problems. We're more sort of attuned to thinking about specific risks and opportunities to individual stocks, to individual companies. And it can be difficult to make the case that an individual company stock price is going to be affected by unethical recruitment practices deep in their supply chain. So sometimes there's a gap there that prevents investors from acting. There's a lot of focus these days on human capital management. But the strongest focus is really on the employees. And that's really important. But it doesn't always get down into the supply chain. And it's really critically important that work does. Also, I think this is technically kind of a legal compliance issue, right? This shouldn't be happening. This is illegal everywhere. And I think most investors kind of assume, well, if it's a compliance issue, it's being taken care of. If it's an egregious human rights issue, then I assume that is unusual and uncommon and not happening all over the place, and that's actually not true. So there's a lot of perceptions that I think need to change. And then the biggest one that Know the Chain really helps us with is, how can we know what's really going on the ground? If we're invested in thousands of companies globally, it's very, very difficult for us. It's a very opaque system. So we need to get smarter about that, and projects like Know the Chain really help us do that. And I'll leave on a sense of optimism, which is that as investors, we don't need to sit back and passively accept the future that's coming towards us. We have influence, and we can use it. We can be a future maker, not simply a future taker. And now I expect you to look very deeply into this legal disclaimer and memorize it. There'll be a quiz later.
I don't have my disclaimer up, so I better get it up.
My legal team will be happy that they were able to get a laugh.
So we are... Oh, your handwriting is horrible. So I have 2 or 3 questions for the panel I'm not going to ask. I'll just put them out there because we want to get to you. And I'd love to hear from Apparel Footwear. Just a couple of minutes. Cimarron, to bring in that sector as well. And particularly, capacity is one of the issues. It takes capacity to do what Greg's team has done, to go back to the village, right? That where the job seeker starts. It takes capacity when a supplier is all of a sudden all these requirements are there, but maybe not even a better price for the product, or how are they to understand the business model going forward, right? With their and they're not usually really looking at the recruitment chain, often don't know it. So there's a lot of areas, and you really touched on that a lot, Marcella. I think the third that I would ask, but just it can be a part of this conversation, is how do you really include, not just as a stakeholder you talk to, but include the foreign migrant worker in, not just in the understanding of the issue, but the strategies to address it, because every single step of the way, from the village to the capital to the country of destination and the employment sector, they have done every single step. So how do we address that? So I'm not going to ask those questions. I'll just put them out there. Hear a little bit from you, Cimarron, in terms of the capacity issue. And then we're going to go to questions here. Of course, unlike me, be succinct and ask the question. And we're going to get some questions from the above, those coming in by phone. So, Cimarron.
Thank you, David. So good morning, everyone. My name is Cimarron Nix. I'm the Senior Director of Labor, Health, and Safety in Nike's Sustainable Manufacturing and Sourcing team. I think the themes that all the members of the panel talked about this morning, I think, are incredibly relevant and really resonate for me in the work that we've been doing on this topic. But David had asked me to speak sort of directly to sort of one aspect of the implementation work that we're really seeking to drive. And I think this challenge around the complexity of the issue and how you really build the right knowledge and capability across all the actors in the system, for brands, for investors, but really we've been quite focused on working with our suppliers. So I think if we think about Greg's mapping of the process and the complexity in the sending country of really understanding, how these workers get recruited before they ever show up for employment. I think one of the things that we've collectively come to understand is that the employers themselves really don't understand this. And so how do we really work with them in effective ways to build the capabilities in their human resources teams so that they can build the right systems to really manage those risks effectively? And, they could have that commitment on paying fees. They could be paying fees to the agents. But if they don't understand, how to appropriately structure the cost to cover things like the visas, like the travel, but also what's the appropriate service fee to pay the agent to actually operate ethically? How do they assess those agents' ability and capability to operate ethically, say in a sending country or a receiving country? And then how to effectively monitor that over time? How to actually build trust with the workers that they're recruiting so that those workers will tell them if things have happened, if they have paid fees, if they have been deceived. So we've been working, in different ways on this over the past several years. So some is direct training, where we work with a service provider to get into detailed training with our suppliers. Some of our suppliers are contracting directly with service providers to help them. In other cases, we're working with, multi-stakeholder groups and other buyers and other suppliers to, conduct those sorts of trainings and other supports, and looking for other sorts of tools to really be practical and very detailed, because the detail really matters. So an example of this is we did a training with a number of our suppliers in Malaysia a couple years ago, really looking at the differences in that recruitment process between sending countries. So if we have a supplier recruiting in Myanmar and Sri Lanka and Indonesia, the processes and the risks are different in each of those places. And that really gets to the complexity of how hard that is to manage. So we've also been creating spaces for our suppliers to share amongst themselves the practical challenges and risks of really doing this work. And I think that's important, of creating safe places for these folks to really grapple with and get support on how to do this a better way. And, you know, I think the underlying impacts are very real, but it's also important to create a way to have discussions about it that takes them out of a defensive place on having done this wrong, both with them and the agents, so that we can really create the change down the road. So that's a little bit of how we've been focused on that piece. I think tons of work to happen with many in this room and elsewhere. One of the reasons that we're members of the leadership group is the opportunity to really think about that system change and advocate transparently with many actors on how we can really build better systems around this. But I think Greg and Marcella both spoke about this being a journey with much more to do, and I think we feel the same way. So thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Actually, I'm going to start with a question from the phone, and then I'll have a question in the room. So we want to get as many as we can. We still have a half an hour before the break, so we can really get into some. We can really talk a lot. You said, right? Okay. So Marcella, this one is directed at you.
Okay.
How did Unilever develop the business case for their sustainability program? How do we convince other companies to follow that type of model?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. I think that if you are among investors, I'm often asked, what is the proof? And what we can present to all of you is that sustainable and responsible business are growing much faster than regular business. And the appetite and interest of everyone. Yeah? No? Did you hear me? Yeah?
I think it's better.
Yeah? So that's the best business case from a business point of view, right? And from the social impact that we have on the work that we do. It doesn't really make sense to oppress or abuse exactly the individuals that are making your products, maybe your customers or consumers are part of that chain. Certainly, there is a moral value of this for us, right? We all in the company I had the privilege to work with, or the company I worked before, we all agreed that it was tough, that was the way that we want to do business. So that's a short answer to that question. We have numbers to demonstrate that makes business sense, but also we have the engagement and commitment that's the way I want to do business. And certainly from a personal point of view, when I started in the 90s, probably one of the first programs on this was because I like business, but I like to do it with a social and sustainable mentality and conscience.
Okay. So in the room, maybe I'll start on this side. A question here, and here. Ben Skinner, you have a question. My question is, you're going to talk to Cimarron at the break. Okay?
Gabriela.
Great. So, Gabriela?
We have table mics. You can just use that. Oh.
Hi, good morning. I'm Gabriela Herzog with the U.S. Council for International Business. And thank you for organizing such an important event. And it's so inspirational to hear all of the examples of the company efforts, yet sobering to recognize, we've got a long way to go and a lot more work to do. I wonder for the companies on the panel, and Cimarron, counting you since you responded from the floor as well, do you have examples for us of where you see the most progress, and then why, or if we're recognizing it's not solved yet, but where are locations where you're feeling optimism, where you're seeing some movement, and if so, what are some of the factors that we can learn from that are present there?
Mm-hmm. No. Do you want to start? Companies on there.
Yeah, sure. Boy, I'm generally not. Yeah, it's the. I think me. Because every time I think of pointing to one area, there's so much work left to do. So I don't want to hold up but I think there's a theme among a couple of things which is a a key to all of this, and Simran pointed it out as well, is in areas where we've seen movement, and sometimes it's just between a couple of suppliers and their chain, or it's with the government or whatever, is it's the building of trust between the actors. And I think this was one of the things in our mapping that was so key, was to having partners, verite, in interacting with the people, the workers, really being able to develop that trust and come out with the facts. The IOM, International Organization for Migration, building trust with recruitment agents. So if we look for a key, it is that being able to interact with the totality of workers, getting their stories, understanding what their stresses are, the process, all of that, being able to go to recruitment agents and trustfully talking about the business relationship we want to have, but still have them in business. And then also talk to government in the areas of what needs to change from policies and some of the problems of tariffs and visas and all of that. So when you start to see movements in those areas, that's what's happened. And then I think it's also very much pointing at the companies, is to look at what your business practices are into this. Because it's fine to put it into a supplier and say, yes, you must pay the fees now, without having a discussion around what the cost of the product is going to be, especially in a transition period. So I would say those elements anywhere in the world will be important. So,
Anybody else? So, for anybody, many of you may know Gabriela, but Gabriela has been an incredible contributor over the years. So I want to recognize that, your work. So global and local. I think that there's progress at the global level because we have you. We have investors, engaged. We have many of you. We have a community that before wasn't there. And there is also the incorporation of unions and the work that unions can do. What we do with IUF and Industrial and ITF right now for transport is it will be fundamental, critical. If we don't work together, I don't want to do it all. I mean, I think that we need to recognize all this, and we need to reach out and learn from those. So I think that there's tremendous amount of progress. I think that at the global level, two areas, Gabriela, I would like to see. I mean, I have been a broken record together with Kevin. One is public procurement. I mean, we need to get governments to do it. I mean, they look into companies and they buy billions. So we need to have that. The second level that you can do something about it, Adam, you can do a lot about it. Financial institutions, those billions that Kevin was talking about, they are not under a mattress. I have been saying that for quite some years, and I see a little bit of movement, and we need to do more on financial institutions can screen people in their system. Where do the monies come from? We need to strangle at that point so we get the market that Adam, the true, transparent, voluntary market that you are saying. So that's another. And at the local level, I want to say, it's I think that both industries and geographies have been progress, right? But we learn post-mortem. We go into fisheries after we have seen the expose. We look into transport after they have been exposed. So how do we get ahead of that wagon? And I think that when you tackle the industries and everybody moves, we see a sea of change. And we have seen it in many of those industries. Geographies, it goes with the economic, formula of the countries and the governments, right? Asia is has been historically providing for much of this, of the labor, and other countries receiving. But there are progress in those countries as well. So the point of action there is government to government. I would like to see more.
Can I add just like two quick things?
Yes.
Just to pick up on that last point, I think is that we're spending a lot of time talking about reimbursement of fees, which is absolutely necessary, and fixing the recruitment system, which is absolutely necessary. But we shouldn't accept that it's normal that millions of people have to leave their home country for a job. There's an economic development issue that really needs to be addressed. That's really at the heart of this. That it requires a lot more people at the table to fix. Yeah. The other piece, just on the optimism side, you asked for something that's sort of optimistic a little bit. If you go back to the 90s, when everybody was talking about sweatshops, and we had the Kathy Lee controversy, and then we had the Saipan settlement. Lots of people were talking about it all the time. You would never, ever, ever be able to get $4 trillion together to make a statement about forced labor. $5 trillion. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's a lot. That's a trillion.
$5 trillion.
It'll be 6
It's
before
important.
the
It
end of
is
the day.
$1 trillion is important. So I mean, the point is, we do have more to go. You know, the CDP is backed by 90 trillion, PRI is 60 or 70 trillion. There's more money out there that is interested in these issues. We can get bigger, but we are way, way, way ahead of where we were 20 years ago. So
Good. Can I just, on the optimistic front real quick, the fact that we've talked about that the business model is broken, or that there's an issue with the business model and business decisions, I think that is showing promise, because it is then creating an opportunity to have a discussion between brands and suppliers about what expectations are when it comes to actually ensuring that fees aren't charged or correcting a problem when it does occur. Because I think that too frequently is a discussion that doesn't happen when it comes to reimbursement or when it comes to corrective action. A lot of times it's the supplier's problem without a kind of acknowledgement that, oh, maybe we in some way contributed to this as well. So I think that's encouraging. Obviously a really long discussion to be had, but it's encouraging to start hearing that more often talked about.
Okay, there are a few questions in the room and some more here. Ben Skinner? And first tell us about
Thanks,
your
David.
child, and then you can get into the issues.
Yeah, those pictures coming.
Yeah, good. I was hoping.
Question is for Adam, or for that matter, any other investors with bright ideas in the room. 2 days ago in Davos, Philip Hildebrand, the vice chair of BlackRock, came out and said climate change is already priced into a lot of their transactions. This is something that, with 1.5 degrees increase in the global temperature, you see the effect drastically, right? And investors, including the largest asset manager in the world, obviously are thinking about this. At what point and on what issues does human rights rise to that level of being priced into on a regular basis the transactions of BlackRock and others, and how do we accelerate that point?
Yep. Great. Thank you so much.
wow, do I have an answer
Adam?
to that question? That's a really hard question, Ben. Well, first off, I'd be skeptical of any statements that climate is priced in. I don't think it is, but I'm not an economist, so I get to say those kinds of things, you know. But I don't think that's true. And I will also say that I heard that from a guy at Merrill Lynch 15 years ago. Oh, all this stuff is priced in. You know, we all know it's in there. It's in there. It's kind of like the Milton Friedman statement. You know, it's like it's embedded in the way things. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to focus on this stuff because it's priced in. Trust the market. Right? It's already in there. So I'm always skeptical when I hear people saying that it's priced in and we're already kind of doing it because investing automatically takes all these things into account, because we know that it doesn't, right? And it certainly doesn't with respect to human rights. And you know, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but you know, we've been spending 20 some odd years to convince companies that failure to address human rights risks in their supply chain is a core reputational risk that's going to crater their stock. And we have very few examples to demonstrate that that's the case. Now, it still can be. That's still possibly true, and it can be true around the margins for some companies. It's a larger risk, and it's a systemic risk, and it's simply unacceptable. And so maybe the answer, because I don't really have a good answer, but maybe the answer is that it's never going to be priced, that pricing is the problem, that we shouldn't think of it in terms of something that's going to be quantified and priced. You know, I think every business can tell us that there are operational costs every day when your workforce isn't treated well, isn't adequately compensated. There's all sorts of problems there. We don't get a good accounting of that. So in that sense, it's built in to the system already, but we're not accounting for it.
Adam, we will agree to disagree.
Ah,
I
okay.
think that, you know,
That's good, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are no half pregnant women, right? I mean, it doesn't exist. And I think that it's not called out as a price out, but it's hidden in the cost and it's hidden in the margin because, and I say that we will disagree because I always remember, someone asked me about the business case, I will always remember that my CEOs, both in the prior and now, used to say, Marcela, this is great, but when I go to review of my performance, no one company is asking me for the work on human rights. Now, that has changed, thanks to all of you, quite a bit, but it's still the predominant sense and feeling. So if the companies are going to be pressed down to deliver on margins and to deliver in cost cutting and all that, we need to understand, to your point, that they has been priced in, but not in the way that we wanted. So I know that there is a cost saving because we are not doing all of these, or the companies are not paying, and those are the ones that I compete with. So I think that we can have, I love to take this discussion going on because all of you have such a critical role in bringing this to the table and making sure that these pricing that is not disclosed is actually put on the table. Because the fact is, how low can you go? There's always someone else who is going to put it out there lower. So I'm fairly competing on that. I'm sorry that, I'm sort of very strong and emotional on this, and you can see because it has been a roadblock. And I come from I started my professional life in finance, so I know this equation very well, and I can tell you, how it comes out in those conversations. So, Adam, you and I will continue talking on that.
I don't think we actually disagree.
That's what the
I
break
think
is
the
for.
point
Yes.
is that it's hidden. And it has to be exposed.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So quick.
So we at Humane United last year launched a new initiative called Moving the Market with a few other foundations specifically to get this problem, right? It's funding research and resources to engage across asset classes and develop new ways to strengthen the S in ESG. Right? We all know here in the room the S is anemic. It's not well developed. It's not well understood. We are specifically funding with others, and we are calling on others as well. If you also agree that this is a problem, then we're not going to solve it simply by doing the same thing. We need to put financial capital, philanthropic capital, and other types of capital into this exact problem if we want to shift this dynamic. So that's first. Secondly, if you're an investor and you care about these issues, and you want to move away from the market not working to the market working, you need to be really concerned about what the SEC is doing right now because they are in the process of undermining your ability as a shareholder to use your voice to push for change. So if you're not actively engaging either behind closed doors or publicly on that issue, then I would question the extent to which you fully are embracing this idea of these sustainability challenges.
Here. Okay, thank you so much. So we have a few questions from let's start. Francis, quickly.
Yep. Thanks, David. Francis House, IHRB. Adam, a quick question for you, if I may. And just following on exactly from what Killian and Marcella, you have just been saying about the fact we're still tinkering around the edges. And yes, a few investors are speaking up on this, and it's fantastic that there's more methodology and research. But if I use the analogy of the leadership group, we started with 5 companies, 2 of whom are on the panel, saying we're going to go out publicly and make a commitment on moving towards an elimination of recruitment fees. We know it's going to be difficult and it's going to be long and slow, but we are going to make that public call to industry peers to join with us on this. And now we've got 15 and, we see that progress is still slow, but its momentum is mounting. Can we, and you yourself said we haven't got enough trillions of dollars under asset management that are really looking at this issue yet. Going back to your roadmap, some of those investor grouping initiatives on coal, I know, Poseidon principles on ship finance, some of these levers where the really, really most powerful global voices in the investor community are calling for action very specifically on some of these things. Can we look, do you think, to a position where we will get the leading global investors calling out specifically something around employer pays principle as one of the most important things of tackling forced labor and kind of joining forces with what these leading companies are doing as well?
Thank you.
That's a great question. I certainly hope so. I think that's part of what's behind the idea to create the Investor Alliance for Human Rights. That there was this recognition that of all the investor platforms out there, all the collaborative efforts, there's no investor platform that is focused exclusively on human rights and exclusively on thinking about how we implement the guiding principles in human rights due diligence. And so that's sort of what the Investor Alliance for Human Rights is about. And that might be the platform to think about that idea. We have the statement in support of Know the Chain. It's not big enough, but maybe we can try to build some more momentum around that. Unfortunately, this is the way it has worked, where climate, for very good reasons, has attracted all the attention because it is the biggest existential systemic risk we face, and finally finance is waking up to that. And walking and chewing gum at the same time is not our best, not our best skill. So it takes a lot of energy just to deal with that, and the social side has often lagged behind. I don't know exactly why that is. Because I suspect that it's because environmental factors are easier to quantify, they're easier to plug into investment models, it's easier to see the numbers. It's very hard to do that with the social side, which is still viewed as somewhat kind of fuzzy. But the whole system is made up of people, so it's really hard to believe that we have left that behind for so long. So I hope we can. It's a good idea.
So Haley, Nina, you had your hand up, right? And then I'm going to go to the phone. So, you have to flip the switch?
Okay, how's that?
Yes, that's good.
A lot of great questions and conversation coming in from on high, so I wanted to make sure to feed that in. Really getting at the question of cost. If it's not migrant workers bearing the burden of paying for their jobs, rightfully so, then someone needs to take up that cost. So far, the feeling is that's really being passed on to suppliers, and that's made even harder in low-margin commodities like sugar, for example. So Adam, but also the others, interested to hear how investors are asking investees to factor in the hopefully short-term increase in cost to suppliers of paying these fees.
Well, right now we're just asking them to pay them.
Yeah.
It's a good, hard question. Again, should it cost as much as it does? Well, one, you have the problem of people having to leave their country for a job, a problem that we've sort of accepted as normal. That's not really normal. Should that process be not at the state, not in terms of millions, right? Millions of people shouldn't be leaving their country because they can't find work there. They should have the freedom to do so, of course, but they shouldn't need to. And should that transit cost as much as it does? Maybe there's ways of making that process more efficient, but that's outside of my expertise.
I think one piece of this is that as the employer pays really gets to the heart of the matter in terms of, first, the reimbursement is kind of an indicator that they've done the work to get to the village, right, and understand what the costs are. But Ray Giardini, who's done a lot of research here, really looks at the whole question of, what workers are charged is not the cost of recruitment. There's so much corruption. And workers are not in a position to say, even when they get to the employment site, deductions. What are they for? They don't know. So I think the cost would come down, right? But I think it's really in the transition between now, which is really the whole transition that needs to take place is from not workers subsidizing everyone else, but rather building it into the business model of negotiations on the product so that becomes more professionalized on a number of fronts. And I do think in the interim, it's really, really helpful when working with suppliers to have brands share the cost, right? Because that way then, it's hard to really, sort of build capacity of a supplier that then is asked to take the whole cost There may be a 2 or 3 year trend. I don't know. I mean, clearly we need to think this through. But if I were a supplier and just trying to get my head around this new requirement that isn't in my factory, but how workers get there, I'd need some, not only some tools, but also some cost help.
But it's a really, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to address, I think that the caller or the person who sent us the question addressed the issue of commodities and certain industries and the issue of fair living income in addition to fair living wage. Some of the commodities, particularly sugar, take cocoa and Côte d'Ivoire, in many areas, is highly complicated. It goes to some of the issues that Adam was addressing. I mean, first, the economic circumstances of the workers, whether they're migrant or local, and what happened to those invisible costs that the person was addressing. So I think that it's linked to the work that we are doing here, but it requires a structural, addressing the structural operating model that that commodity has. If you take, for instance, the work that we have done on tea wages in Malawi, what we learned is that you can also have unintended consequences, because in the current model that we are right now, so if you increase in certain places, some of the companies may move to another place, right? So how do you increase and address the issues and the invisible costs that the person is addressing in certain commodities, and and how do you resolve the issues? For instance, we work a lot on productivity, on skills, on addressing and bringing those invisible costs up front. So it's linked to everything that we have been saying and what David just said, but there are certain jobs that we need to really look into it, and we are up to the task, but it has to be, as we said before, in a multi-stakeholder platform.
Can I
Yeah.
just to underline, because this is a really, really important point. The real cost of the process is we were, from a worst case scenario, it's under 10% of what the cost is now. It can be 20% depending on the thing. But talking to suppliers about professionalizing the relationship they have with the recruiters, because now there's no cost. You put in an order, people show up. I mean, we say you would never do that with cotton, with wood, with any materials you're buying, but with people, that's great. So you turn it into that, they're providing a professional service to you. I will pay for that. What is the true cost of that? You should make some profit. I will pay, and all that. But it's that mindset of just. And the cost is significantly less than what it is now. Yeah.
Okay. Nina?
Nina.
Oh, we haven't been asking people to identify the organization they're with, but that's okay. We'll start now.
We need it now.
Okay. Okay, I'm Nina Gardner, and I'm a corporate sustainability consultant and adjunct professor in business and human rights at Johns Hopkins SAIS. I have a question, not so much down the weeds, but from process. Is anyone talking to the banks? Because I was really struck by Kevin's statement about remittances. This is a place where banks could really have a major role. And not only with making sure that the recruitment fees are maybe paid back, for starters, for the companies to show, know and show here, but also in terms of helping these people develop credit ratings. And so when they come back to their countries, the banks know them. And we're talking, there's a lot of money involved here. So I'm just wondering whether this leadership group for responsible recruitment is going to add a sort of a banking group. I would think that a lot of banks would be interested in this.
Do you want me to take it? Well, I take, but I will pass to Kevin. So that is the issue. I mean, Nina, you're right on. I mean, you know this so well. We need to bring the banks and the financial institutions who are actually, whether they know it or not, they are moving those monies. Actually, many times they are making it legal. I mean, they came through a flow and then they are, they had to be here. Some of the organizations are doing work, but there is more. I'm turning to Kevin. I mean, Kevin, when you were the UK commissioner, you're very cognizant of this issue and you were addressing. You should be addressing. Yeah. is our chair also.
So I think the issue you raise about banks is really absolutely crucial. It feeds into what Adam was saying, that, why are people moving? And if this money's going home and they've got options to get loans and to invest, just like all of us do normally, then that will be the big change that's needed. So banks are crucial. I think as well that, it is normal for people to move sometimes for work, but when it's a necessity, and that sort of money, as you're talking about, we're talking about nearly $700 billion US dollars, well invested, can actually make enormous amounts of change. So the banks are crucial.
So one anecdote is one of the videos and training that Kevin put together when he was the commissioner addressed the voice of the person abused. And what they were doing, they were stealing their name to then open credit cards. So if you remember, so here you have not only a person that was trafficked, but then their name and identity is stolen, so then they go and apply for credit, and they get a credit card, and even if they are free, they have like thousands in debt. So think about the impact that they can have. That's a call to all of you to help us get done.
So we're running out of time. One quick point, maybe we could pick it up with the next panel, is that, the Liechtenstein process that ended up with a major report at the UN. A number of people in the room, I think, were a part of it. Sean, you were on that made recommendations because it was looking at the financial sector related to how to address modern slavery. So it's very much appropriate. So I think we might pick that up. Well, listen, let's thank the panel. I think what we've done here is just, we've got a lot on the table. There's another panel that I think is going to be even better than this one. But thank the panel. Thanks a lot.
So why don't we get started? My name is Sean McDonald. I'm the CEO of Verite. And Verite is a civil society organization that works globally to promote workers' rights. Through our assessments and training and consulting and research and policy advocacy, we work with pioneering companies, civil society organizations, workers' groups, and governments to try to set the right expectations for how supply chain policies and practices can prioritize and respect workers' rights. Because we work across the world, across many, many sectors, we see these recruitment abuses all the time. We have a lot of initiatives and a lot of publicly available resources that are useful for businesses as well as investors as well as civil society organizations. So I really encourage you to go to verite.org to access those free resources. I also wanted to acknowledge my colleague Justine Shakespeare, who's over there, who also works a lot on ethical recruitment issues and is a real expert on many of these things. So during the breaks or during lunch, I encourage you to put her knowledge to the test. But I also just wanted to acknowledge all of Justine's efforts. I also wanted to pick up on the comment made earlier by David about the Liechtenstein Initiative for a Financial Sector Commission on Modern-Day Slavery and Human Trafficking. It's quite a mouthful. I was honored to be a commissioner in that process last year. I'm also happy to say that they've rebranded themselves as the FAST Initiative, Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking, which is much easier to say and easy to search on the internet at fastinitiative.org. You can find a lot of resources as well as the report from all of us commissioners that really highlights not just how investors but also other parts of the financial sector, be they banks, financial service providers like lenders and money transfer agencies, insurance, bonds holders, all sorts of elements of the financial sector, how they are connected to this problem of forced labor, but also a wide variety of short-term, medium-term, and long-term steps that can and should be taken by the financial sector to deal with this problem, including, of course, the problem of unethical recruitment. One thing I think that didn't get as much attention from that financial sector commission that I would really encourage you to look into and work with is the role that the financial sector, as well as the companies they're associated with, should play in policy advocacy and collective action. So obviously, as we've been touching on throughout the morning, what we're dealing with here is a very, very dysfunctional migration policy scenario across the world in all of these recruitment corridors in both developed and developing countries. We're also talking about a highly dysfunctional market that, as Adam and Ben and many others that were commenting this morning are highlighting, is not punishing those who are participating in slavery, but in fact they're still being rewarded because they're being rewarded for being so-called profitable, although those profits are at the expense of the most vulnerable people who are paying essentially billions of dollars a year. And we all know that governments around the world are much more likely to listen to investors and businesses than to their own citizens or to civil society organizations. And so it's really important for the investment community and the private sector more generally to really step up to talk about the rule of labor law, much more functional migration policies, and also this issue of market distortions, because that is the heart of the problem here. And so what we'd like to do with this panel is really focus on this issue of how engagement around policy, engagement through collective corporate action, as well as actions of workers and worker allies themselves, can help to shift this market and also help to promote the kinds of policies that are needed both around recruitment, migration more generally, and also around the way that these particular business practices around recruitment and hiring are regulated, so that we can flip this market, so that the billions it costs, it's reasonable costs, moving people from country to country, from job to job. There are costs there that are legitimate. Those need to be borne by the employers, as we've been saying, but we need to change the policies and market mechanisms. And so it's a real privilege for me to be able to moderate this panel with three women who are deeply engaged in these issues from a variety of perspectives and who will help us understand what is being done and, more importantly, what you all can do together to help flip this market. So first we'll hear from Alex Check from the Responsible Business Alliance to talk about collective business action around some of these issues. Then we'll hear from Rachel Micah Jones from CDM, who will really help us ground these issues in the dysfunctional U.S. guest worker system, where we see these things at play every day. It's not just out there in the developing world, but also in developed countries like our own. And also Rachel can tell us a lot about what migrant workers themselves and their allies are doing to advocate for themselves and find solutions. And then we'll hear from Anwen Fan from Walmart, who will talk about some of the new and different things that are happening in the government advocacy space, corporate lobbying space with governments around the world around these issues. So Alex, can you start us off, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Okay, I think if the mic's on. Hi, my name is Alex Check. It's nice to see many of you. I'll be very open to say that I actually came into this new role about a month ago. I was working with a member company previously, so I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm looking forward to really diving in and speaking more about this issue with you. So to start, I'm here to represent the Responsible Labor Initiative. Some of you may start to question, what is the relationship between the Responsible Business Alliance and the Responsible Labor Initiative? So I think it's helpful to take a quick look at this slide so you can understand that we have several initiatives that have actually grown out of the Responsible Business Alliance. We have created these initiatives around specific high-risk areas in order to engage members beyond, or engage companies that go beyond our core members, as well as stakeholders that represent other groups that are not companies, and really advance our work on these issues. So for example, we have the Responsible Minerals Initiative, which focuses on the responsible sourcing of minerals and supply chains. And as you can see, the Responsible Labor Initiative, which is focused on forced labor in the supply chain. And that's where we're going to dive in today. The Responsible Labor Initiative is a multi-industry, multi-stakeholder initiative. We have companies, again, that go beyond our core members, and we also have non-company stakeholders. It's important for us to recognize that we have voting non-company stakeholders, including an investor seat, which David Schilling holds. It's important for us to get this perspective and this guidance in steering our organization. We offer tools and resources that provide end-to-end due diligence around the recruitment and employment processes. I think it's really important here to highlight both the recruitment and the employment phase. We talk about them sometimes interchangeably, but what we see is that there's a very specific recruitment process that may or may not be done by the actual suppliers themselves. They may be done by third parties. And then there's actually an employment phase, which is the worker's experience during their employment all the way until their termination of their employment. We were launched in June 2017, which means this will be our third year, which is very exciting. One of the reasons, and we had spoken to Sean about this, about why the RLI really came about, was because this was a high-risk issue for companies. We were seeing this as an emerging issue. Lots of discussions from customers and the media and governments and investors. And so this organization really came about as a way to convene, bring us together, help to collaborate in a space where there were only a few other organizations doing this, and really try to advance the conversation. What we want to highlight here is what our vision and mission are. Our vision is that the rights and dignity of workers vulnerable to forced labor in global supply chains are consistently respected and promoted throughout the responsible recruitment and employment practices. And how we see ourselves as being able to do that is through our members, our suppliers, the recruitment agencies and partners, and our stakeholders, who are going to be able to use their collective influence as well as their application of these due diligence tools and resources to really transform the market, to reduce risk and continuously identify and remediate instances, of where we see forced labor. We have over 150 member companies who we have shown some of their logos here today. As you can see, this goes well beyond our core members, and even before we were called the Responsible Business Alliance, we were named the Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition. So I think a lot of people naturally associated us with electronics companies, but we've really gone beyond that at this point. Of course, as I mentioned, we have non-company members as well, and we unfortunately do not have logos for them on the screen, but we will be able to include them in the discussion moving forward, especially today as they're in the room. So to dive in a little more to some of the tools and resources that we offer, we ensure that our tools are aligned with the OECD in terms of the due diligence that we recommend. And I'm going to focus and highlight a few specific instances of those so that you can ask questions and we can, of course, use those as examples in the following discussion. The first is, of course, the recommendation that companies develop or establish strong company management systems. I think most of you are familiar with the concept of a code of conduct, and we have the RBA code of conduct, especially the provision around freely chosen employment. But it's also important for us to highlight that we offer additional resources like the RBA definition of fees and the practical guide to implementing the no fees policy. And I'll highlight those here because the definition of fees is such an important document. For anyone who's actually trying to implement a employer pays principle or a workers do not pay for the cost of their jobs type of principle, you need to talk about what those fees are. There is rarely an instance, well, rarely, there's never an instance where a worker is paying a one-time fee and that is their, quote, recruitment fee. That does not happen. Workers are being asked to pay for medical exams, for visas, for paperwork, for their airfare, for paying for the service of the recruitment agents themselves. And rarely do workers even know what they're paying for when they pay it. And they may make multiple payments and not have any receipts for these costs. So it's important for us to really outline for those that are trying to implement these policies what we consider fees, what are allowable and not allowable per our standards. The second step is, of course, to identify and assess risks in the supply chain. For this, we, of course, as well have a variety of tools. We're going to highlight the supplemental validated audit process here. And a large thank you, of course, to Sean and the team at Verite who have been implementing this tool for us over the last year. Similar to a social compliance audit, this is an audit that goes in to assess the indicators of forced labor. It is more expansive than a typical social compliance audit. It includes the recruitment agents as part of the audit and focuses specifically on the core indicators of forced labor, especially during worker interviews, which our auditors are specially trained on. Third, the cease, prevent, and mitigate adverse impacts. I'm going to just kind of highlight this because we're going to go more in depth on the responsible recruitment program on the next slide. But these are a variety of tools in terms of learnings and ways that you can engage your suppliers as well as your recruitment agents in better understanding the standards that we put forward and, of course, that the members adopt and put forward themselves. For tracking, implementing, and results, we offer SVAP corrective action plans. Again, knowing there's a variety of practices in the room. For those of you that are very familiar with audits, you know that you'll find non-compliances. You'll find something that goes wrong in an audit, and then you're seeking to remediate what happened during that audit. So you're seeking to remediate the non-compliance. So we want to ensure that there's corrective action plans that assist companies while they're trying to remediate those risks that they've identified. Finally, we support members in communicating how their impacts are addressed. We offer model disclosure templates as well as reporting guidance. And as recently as December of last year, we worked and published with the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, a guidance document on reporting under the disclosures that are required by the UK and California. So if you're not familiar, that's the California Supply Chains and Transparency Act and the UK Modern Slavery Act, which for investors, that's a good question right away to ask companies. Take a look at those statements, see what the companies are doing, and you can better understand what their progress is and what their commitments are through those statements. And finally, the additional step 6 is, I think, what's really important, and I've been really excited to work with the RLI on, is that they provide for and cooperate in remediation when appropriate. So here we're going to highlight the Labor Migration Corridor Database. This is a document that really helps members to understand the fees that their workers could potentially be charged, and goes to a lot of the earlier conversations around corruption and actual costs versus real costs. So that is to say, we've worked with Verite actually, and some of our members who actually initially donated and worked on this document to outline the various recruitment corridors and an understanding of what those costs could be in those various recruitment corridors. So for example, if you have a worker that goes from Nepal to Malaysia, you may be able to ask, or you may want to ask, what is a typical cost for visa processing? What will the airfare look like for my workers? And what are the other various costs that they may be asked to pay? This document is outlining what the range of costs could be for each of those different indicators. And we give this to our members and update it on an annual basis or a regular basis. I think every 2 years is what we're looking at. And this is so that can really facilitate that conversation with suppliers when they explain that a worker paid $1,000 for airfare and you're looking at this document and you see it's around $400. That's also luckily an easy Google search, by the way. You can have that better conversation to say, why was this cost so high? Was there a reason? Is there a hidden cost in here somehow? And it really helps to facilitate that conversation. We also offer shared remediation. Again, I think this is such a pivotal point for initiatives that are working with companies, is that we can work with our companies together. A lot of companies do not have a supplier that is solely theirs, and I think that is a common misconception in supply chains. You may account for only 2% of the production volume of a supplier, or 3%. You might not have a lot of leverage, but collectively, with other companies, you can. And so I think that's really important, that companies can come to an initiative such as the RLI to say, we're having a problem, we need to get this supplier on board, we need to get them to repay, and we want to work together to show them that everyone is asking for this, and that everyone's messaging is consistent when they're asking, that they're asking for the same thing, and they're asking for similar timelines, and that really helps, again, facilitate the process. How am I doing on time? Okay, I had to check. Here, we want to dive into the responsible recruitment program. This was one of the items that I outlined in step 3 for how we can how we can cease, prevent, and mitigate adverse impacts. So what this program is offering is a program specifically for recruitment agents. These recruitment agents do not have to be in our member supply chain. A recruitment agent can apply to be in the program even if it's not associated with a member. The only stipulation we do have is that the recruitment agent has to have a consistent ethical practice across their business. That means they cannot say, for this company, I will act ethically and not charge fees, and then for this company, I will not. We cannot have that. We cannot have that separation. So they have to act consistently across all of their business dealings and their contracts with customers. So essentially, when they enter the program, past making that commitment, they're able to undergo trainings, demonstrate to their customers and to the public what they're doing and the progress they're making, and then be able to undergo forced labor audits that will allow them to demonstrate through a due diligence method that they are meeting the standards, they are acting in accordance with what is being asked of them, and they can provide evidence that they are doing so. I think we don't really need as many carrots for our members. I think what really has been the question is, how do we bring carrots to the suppliers? How do we do that for the recruitment agents? And I think that goes back to the questions that we've had in the room already, which is,
What is the incentive for doing this, and how do we address any barriers to them adopting this willingly in the first place? Do recruitment agents see this as a challenge to employ? Do they see enough ethical business coming to them to be able to enter our program and offer an ethical model? Is that going to be financially sound for them? And I think that's where we need to work with members to make sure that we're all consistently asking for the same things, that we can offer them enough business and enough volume so that they have a sustainable business model. And that we need to make sure that suppliers are also seeing that same business case being made, that they're getting consistent messaging that this is a requirement, this is a standard, that they need to work with us, and that they're hearing that from all of their customers, not just one or two of them. So I think for us, it's really working down that chain with the different actors.
Okay, great. So, Rachel, please tell us more about CDM's work.
Great. Good morning. And thank you so much first to David and to Neil for inviting me to be here today. I'm really inspired by everyone's commitment to responsible recruitment and to addressing human trafficking, and very impressed with the design and PowerPoint skills this morning. As Sean said, my name is Rachel Micah Jones, and I'm the founder and executive director of Centro de los Derechos del Migrante, or the Center for Migrant Rights, CDM. And at CDM, we support migrant worker organizing and advocacy, primarily in Mexico and the United States. So through our 4 program areas, we win positive changes for migrants in recruitment and working conditions. Through outreach, education, and leadership development, we meet with migrant workers in their home communities and equip them with rights information and tools to prevent and defend against abuse. Through our intake, evaluation, and referral programs, we interview workers, we evaluate their cases, and provide services, legal services, to hundreds of cases each year. And through our litigation and litigation support work, we hold actors accountable throughout the recruitment supply chain and set important new legal precedents. And finally, through our policy advocacy, we bring the voices and experiences of migrant workers to the debates around labor and migration. And we do this through documentation and survey-based reports, congressional briefings, and working with more than 30 allied organizations in a coalition called Migration That Works, which was formerly International Labor Recruitment Working Group, or the ILRWG. And through this advocacy, we defend against legislative attacks to migrant workers' rights. We advance policy proposals at the federal, state, local, and regional levels. And aside from this work, CDM leads some cross-cutting initiatives like Contratados.org, which I'll mention a little bit later, the future of guest work, and campaigns like the current campaign around the implementation of the USMCA or the new NAFTA. So today, as I mentioned, I'm really inspired by the commitment of everyone here to address recruitment abuses, but I am deeply troubled by the trends that we're seeing in this corridor. We're witnessing, for example, unprecedented growth in the use of the low-wage guest worker programs. And as we're seeing those increases in the use of temporary guest worker visas, we're simultaneously noting efforts to limit immigration or migration channels where there may be some access to permanence or portability. So attacks on access to asylum, threats to rescind DACA or deferred action for childhood arrivals, increases in immigration raids, and all of these trends have created an increased sense of vulnerability in migrant communities and the communities in which we work. So in agricultural, for example, and farm work this year, we've reached record levels of guest workers. And that's an industry where abuse of guest workers are well documented. And despite these huge increases in the use of the program, there have been no major reforms implemented to stem these abuses. So here are a few problems with our policy framework. First, visas are controlled by employers, and workers have little or no access to portability when they face abuse. Second, employers subcontract with recruitment agencies and recruiters, and often we see multiple layers of subcontracting. We heard this earlier in other corridors in the prior panel. In the U.S., we have an alphabet soup of visa categories, and so what the visa regulations and the rights that migrant workers have when they're working under these visas vary by industry, they vary by visa type. So for example, we do a lot of work with traveling fair and carnival workers, and many of these workers are recruited on what's called an H-2B visa. Under those regulations, those workers should not be charged fees. But those workers may be working alongside hundreds of J1 workers whose regulations permit the charging of thousands of dollars in recruitment fees. And to address those fees, workers need to use other tools like minimum wage laws. It makes it complicated and difficult for both workers and employers to navigate. There's also just a complete lack of government oversight and enforcement. We file multiple complaints with agencies like the Department of Labor, track those, and almost all go unaddressed. This means that enforcement must be done privately, and there are very few organizations or resources for migrant workers to bring complaints when they face violations of their rights. Federal law denies funding to legal services organizations that represent guest workers, and these are people who are here working on these short-term visas. Current policy also creates a disincentive to report fees. So, for example, if a worker is charged a fee in her community of origin and she goes to the embassy and she reports the charging of fees, what happens? That job order is canceled. That worker is without a job and also typically without the money that she had paid for that job in the United States. There are also trends, within the current administration to reduce access to data. The iCert portal, which this is getting too technical, but the labor certification data which is previously available is going to be taken down. Those plans have been announced. And there are just a number of troubling trends with respect to access to data and transparency. But what are the consequences of these policies and the consequences of the lack of transparency and accountability in recruitment? We know that, that the majority of guest workers who are recruited in Mexico to work in the United States are paying to work. Now, through our research, we found that a worker is paying an average of $590 just for the recruitment fee. This is exclusive of visa, passport, travel, medical fees, any other fees that the worker may be paying. Almost half of these workers are taking on debt to pay for these fees. 1 in 10 is paying for a job that doesn't exist. And most of the workers are not getting access to contracts or information about the job that they're going to work in. And this data is a little bit old, but I can tell you that this week we're wrapping up data collection in a report that we'll be releasing in March. And fees, fraud, and debt continue to be major problems for guest workers recruited in this corridor. And also, we're seeing disturbing trends around discrimination based on sex and age as well. So at CDM, we're pushing for an alternative model that would work across visas and across sectors. And we're pushing for introduction of federal legislation, which we're hoping to see in the spring. So stay tuned on that. But we know that we cannot wait on federal governments in Mexico or the U.S. to really fully address this issue. So we're also pushing for local and state policies, and we're hoping to have some of your support in Maryland, where on February 3rd a new bill will be dropped. And so we'll be looking for support of some of you in the room on that initiative. And we're also innovating sort of new and different strategies to address these abuses outside of the policy sphere. So one of the tools that we've been using to address recruitment abuse is called contratados.org. And Contratados is it's a Yelp-like tool that was co-designed and built with migrant workers to address some of the abuses that migrant workers are seeing in recruitment. And what it does is it pools collective worker knowledge and puts it alongside data that we've culled from various sources, like Department of Labor certification data. And it allows workers to have a more informed picture when they're making decisions about migration and about their lives. And it also allows migrant workers to track actors that are not being tracked by the government. So a lot of recruiters are not being tracked by the government and recruitment agencies. And so it's creating a fuller picture of who all these actors are in the recruitment supply chain. It also helps workers avoid fraud. Essentially, workers share their experiences, they alert others to fraud, they seek support to address violations of their rights, and they make their voices heard on policy issues that impact them. So in addition to supporting some of the policy efforts I mentioned, like the federal legislation and the Maryland bill, Corporate actors here can support transparency in recruitment by sharing information about their recruitment chains and their suppliers so that we can have a fuller picture of what's really happening here. And also, we're experimenting with a pilot pathway to portability, a stage 2 of contratados.org, and we are looking for responsible employers to partner with us on that effort. And so feel free to find me later and we can talk more about that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. It'd be great to hear now from Anbin Fan from Walmart, who has a very intimidating title of Director of Global Government Affairs. But I know that she's been very active in trying to harness the power of a lot of businesses to effectively advocate with governments around the world, particularly on this issue of flipping recruitment, the recruitment market and saner recruitment policies. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sean, and such an honor to be on this panel today and to speak with you. As Sean mentioned, I work for Walmart. I'm the Director for Global Government Affairs, and as part of my portfolio, I work on advocacy to promote responsible recruitment as well as to address issues around forced labor in high-risk supply chains. And so today, I want to talk about this advocacy work, why we do it, what it is, and how. So just getting to the nuts and bolts so that you all can get a picture. I know that when I was in college or in public policy school, I did not think I would be doing advocacy work from the arm of a corporation. So that is a shift, and that is something that definitely, as we talk about responsible recruitment as a journey, the public policy piece is also a journey where we play, how we act, the steps we take to engage governments around the world. So when it comes to why we act, it comes to something very simple, which is our values. What are our values as a company? And we have, when we look at our responsible sourcing, we want to promote worker dignity. And in short, that's safe conditions for workers and workers who are working free from coercion. Short and simple, that they have dignity as they work. And I'm proud to also share that in 2018, in the fall of 2018, we came out with our human rights statement. And I was on the working team to come out with this human rights statement. And we looked at our company policies, as well as the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the UN Guiding Principles, as well as the ILO 1998 agreement, just looking at these governing documents and looking at our company policies and understanding the nexus of where we are as a retailer to impact our associates, our customers, our communities, and our supply chain. And so what role do we play in providing jobs and addressing issues around human rights and sustainability? And finally, I'm always hearing this at Walmart, is that our goal is to become the most trusted retailer. And that takes form in so many different ways, whether it's trust on making sure that your time is not wasted when you shop with us, to ensuring that the products we provide have product safety, to the idea that when you are purchasing from us, we are doing everything we can in terms of due diligence to provide safe working conditions for those who work in our supply chains. So that's really why we do it, is based on our values. So you see this chart here, and this was actually developed in conjunction with one of our consulting companies as we looked at one of our supply chains and thinking of models on how we as Walmart, as a retailer, have impact and influence. And what you can see here is that there's internal actions that every company can take, as well as external actions that a company can take. And so in the first bucket of the internal actions, that's in some ways what I would call strictly business, right? So what do we buy? Our assortment, our policy, our private brands, our purchasing power, and who we companies we believe in, what we purchase, right? And so also what we can do to influence our suppliers. Walmart is a retailer at the end of the chain. We have many suppliers. I was just at a tuna forum in January. We convened the tuna industry to come together to make some commitments that we'll be sharing later around certifications and what we want to do in terms of promoting sustainable tuna. And by 2021, MSC certified tuna as our goal for our private brands, and by 2025, we'll have other specific commitments, and we're bringing all of our suppliers along. I was very impressed with that tuna forum. We had people coming everywhere from Hawaii to Australia to come to this forum where our merchants said, this is what we're going to buy. So then moving on to external actions, there's the collective action piece, which we've heard a little bit of what Alex shared, and that's where we join groups like the Seafood Task Force, the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment, as well as the Responsible Business Alliance to drive change in the industry. And that, I won't belabor that because we've talked a little bit about that, but that's to say that no one company, no one government, and no one business, even one sector can make entire change, that we have to act together. That's something that we often say at Walmart, and it's a reality, especially because of the cross-border nature of these issues. And then we go to philanthropy, and I'm pleased to have my colleague from the Walmart.org, which is another way to say Walmart Foundation, Carrie Deniston, here with us today. That's where we make investments in areas like technology, insights on data analytics, law and enforcement. And I'm glad to have one of our colleagues from International Justice Mission here, as well as many of our other grantees who we partner with to address issues in specific chains such as seafood. And finally, to the advocacy piece, and this is where I'll spend the rest of my time and walk you through. I want to get a sense of a time check. 3 minutes. 3 minutes, okay. So when we're looking at advocacy, that's really, I looked at, it's engaging governments and intergovernmental bodies to impact change, or public support for recommendation of a particular cause or policy, speaking on behalf or in support of another person, place, or thing. I got all of this from Wikipedia. But, but the idea too, I was thinking a lot about what Adam shared earlier today. How do we, and this relates to also as we were at APEC in 2017 speaking to the Malaysian government, what I really realized is that countries around the world want economic development. They want foreign direct investment. And as companies, we have a voice to say, this isn't what an attractive business environment looks like. These are the laws and policies you should have in place, and this is where we are going to operate because these are the values we have. And so that is sort of the advocacy piece there. And so that's the what. And this slide I'll go through quickly. It really starts with leadership from the top of the house, I would say, which is our CEO, Doug McMillan, said by the end of 2026, we want responsible recruitment to be the standard business practice for employers throughout the global supply chain. So the formal title is What Leadership, but the informal title for this slide is Why I Have a Job. And it's to why I'm sitting in the seat of a corporation and working to promote responsible recruitment and combat forced labor. And here, what we have is a systems focus. And what this is I've talked about this prior. This is just different ways that companies can engage on government relations. Everything from the industry initiatives, the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment, for instance, holds government roundtables and has held them in Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand to address issues of public policy with different members of different ministries. And so that is a piece. The Seafood Task Force has now a subgroup 3, and I've been working with them to talk about what the subgroups need to advance their work, and particularly in responsible recruitment, looking at MOUs, for instance, between Cambodia and Thailand. On the multilateral forum, those are, working with groups such as the Bali Process Government and Business Forum, which works with 40 countries in the Asia Pacific to share principles and promote soft law that begins to impact the language, the cadence, and the momentum around promoting responsible recruitment. Then really the bilaterals and the direct government interaction is where the rubber hits the road. That's where laws are formed, resources are spent. That's everything from translation services for migrant workers to service provision to migrant workers to law enforcement. And so that is the bilateral roundtables. And businesses can also look at where they source and where they do business, and again say, we will source from countries that protect human rights, that address sustainability issues, that have gender inclusion. And this is, I recently went with our global sourcing team to Vietnam, and this is the message that we conveyed to trade associations and to the highest levels of government, that this is how we want to do business and the high expectations we have for our suppliers. And finally, business collaboration. I highly encourage that companies begin to think about the voice that they have in creating the ecosystem for business and for working together to really address risk, not only risk, but opportunity in the supply chain. And that's it. This is a final picture I have. This is, one of the government relations, the first actually government relations meeting I had with the Thai government. And there's Adisorn Promthep, who's the DG for fisheries, and Minister Sam Boon, who works for the Department of Employment. But just a lot of it is how we can collaborate. These are allies, but also, to challenge where there needs to be challenged. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ann Ben. I'm just going to ask Ann Ben a quick question before I open it up to the group. Throughout the day, we've been hearing about how the obvious marginalization of migrants and their lack of power is at the root of many of these problems. And I'm just curious what you see as the role in this business advocacy with governments to address that imbalance.
I think I was thinking about this, especially with migrants. It's an issue around sending and receiving countries. And so not only is there a power imbalance, there's also a challenge where there needs to be a voice not only in the country where migrants leave, but also a voice where they are received. And so it's so important to say we as a global business, we value just because these workers are leaving your country and we're sourcing within your country, this still matters to us because, for instance, we have a business Asda in the UK and those Vietnamese workers are going to the UK, but that matters to us as well. So I think the global reach and the voice in being a multinational saying, actually, this issue of migration is not only the issue of doing business in your borders, but extends beyond that. But at a very basic level, too, it goes back to sort of what I picked up at APEC in 2017, which is that these government leaders will often listen to business more than they will to their citizens, which should not be the case, which absolutely is not right, that they should provide these consular services and embassy services and protections for workers. But often the migrant worker is, not a citizen of the country, right? And often this is not discussed, but of a different racial group that is not favored. And so there's a lot of tensions. I literally heard in UNGA from Malaysia said we have a work to do to balance the races. I was surprised, but it is an issue of race that if you show so much protection and favoritism to one group, that is political challenge for some of the political leaders. And this is a reality not discussed often, but this is a real core issue in this issue of response recruitment and migration. So long story short, business in saying this is the business environment we want to create, putting it in terms of FDI and putting it in terms of those interests, we can bring in different ministries. So you begin to bring in not just the Ministry of Labor, but the Ministry of Commerce, Minister of Trade, and you begin to help the countries realize that if they're on the pathway to sustainable development, that these are the pillars of human rights that they need to put in place.
Great, thanks. I'm glad you mentioned foreign direct investment because that opens up this role for investors and investor groups and institutional investors, not just brands and retailers and so on playing that role in advocacy. I'd love to get some questions from the audience. As I said, you have three of the most expert people in the world on this topic. Question in the back?
Hi, I'm Andy Shen from Greenpeace US. My question is to Anbin, and thank you all for sharing. One of the troubling developments that civil society has noticed recently is that in Thailand, Even though in the last few years there's been improvements in laws and regulations to address both IUU fishing and labor abuse, with that improvement, U.S. retailers have been moving to other markets, such as India, to source shrimp because the cost of production has increased due to those more stringent regulations that protect workers. So what can U.S. retailers do to demonstrate their commitment to human rights in Thailand when they rightfully advocate for improvement in policies, but then shift their sourcing?
That is a great question. I was just at CWeb this year, and that's something that Dr. Adesorn brought up from the Department of Fisheries. I don't think it's that straightforward of a story in terms of that they've taken measures and they've done, basically they're saying we're so proud, we've revolutionized the industry, they have made vast improvements. But the reality was there was also disease in some of the fishing industry. And what happened was the supply chain did shift in that period of vulnerability. The supply chain did go to India and to Vietnam. They took that opportunity in that time that Thailand, the shrimp, was had a disease sector and also the negative sort of press. The industry did shift. That's not to say global retailers. I know the seafood buyer quite well, and she is actually joining the seafood task force as a board member. And so I think that's sort of our position is diversification is important. But Thailand, the supply and the stock has gone down. They were one of the top suppliers of seafood, and they've gone down to number 7. And so it's been a combination of the companies maintaining their stocks and maintaining healthy supply and taking all those measures. I think countries should be rewarded. We're expanding the Seafood Task Force next to Vietnam. And the reality is VASEP, the Vietnamese Association of Seafood Exporters and Producers, they're asking, if we're taking in all these measures in transparency and labor and there's some cost involved, will you continue to buy our goods? And that's a really good question, that as you take these measures, you should be rewarded. And I agree. What we're doing, which has been very exciting, is that we are promoting sustainable seafood in our stores. So out of our 4,000 stores, talking specific to us, I think you asked a broader industry question, but hopefully this gives a sense. We're beginning to, in 1,400 of our stores, we're piloting signage to say this is, Marine Stewardship Council seafood, this is sustainable seafood, putting signs and symbols, because part of it too is customers. Right? So it's so important that customers, you do pay a price premium, there is a price premium, but customers, and especially millennials, are willing to pay that price premium. So it's our job, and we're working on that, to do the marketing, right? So that the whole chain understands what the true cost is. And we have everyday low prices, but we also have everyday true low prices. And that's what we're trying to do through our displays, and so that we can reward those retailers that are doing a good job. And sort of what I mentioned with the tuna forum is to say to our suppliers, these are our standards. So if Thailand can meet that and that certification, then they win. And this is what we're requiring as our global commitment.
Thanks. This is a good thing for investors to pay attention to, is how are the procurement decisions of companies lining up with their social commitments? And I would say also, what are their lobbying efforts? How does that line up with their social commitments? So this is a good case study of that. Question maybe from this side of the room? Or over here? Anybody on the phone? Yeah.
Yeah, a few coming in online. A simple question with, I'm sure, a complex answer. What tools have you used to map your supply chains?
I think that's just you.
Well, Rachel probably has some ideas too about how your company should, but go ahead.
So I think that question, it is a simple question with different answers, because different supply chains, it's one thing that I've also picked up from Carrie's, as a retailer like Walmart, we serve service 270 million customers per week. We operate in 28 different countries, and we sell everything, someone said, except bricks and cars, although someone in India pointed out that we also don't sell rockets. So that was a really good point. But, you know, particularly when you're looking at the supply chain, we buy from Mars and Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, I should mention, and just, you know, all kinds, Bumblebee, Thai Union. So there's sort of the work we do in trusting our brands. And then we have also our private brands. And so the mapping for our private brands can be a lot more targeted, right? So we know at the very least from the packing houses, sometimes to the farms, we can do, you know, we have a strong sense of who that is. We have lists, we have information and data on that in terms of our supply chain. But as my colleague Barbara was mentioning, you know, when you go deeper back into the supply chain, when you go beyond the packing house to the various farms, you know, we do have our responsible sourcing team to, we have resources to look at compliance and audits through the chain. But the reality is at some point, you know, if we're looking at all the way back, we're beginning to, for instance, I know particularly the seafood chain well, you know, when you're looking at the fish meal and the feed, we're beginning to require more electronic traceability or tracking or information there. But we, you know, in terms of tools and innovations, for instance, around blockchain for public safety, health, those are tools that are being piloted. And so, investment there is much welcomed and is work we're working to do.
Right. Rachel, did you have some comments?
I just wanted to say a few things that are just responding to some of the comments that were made. And the first is really to highlight the importance of the issue around race. On the policy front, we've seen some changes in terms of the list of eligible countries to send guest workers to the U.S. Haiti was removed from that list after the president had made a comment about the kind of country that Haiti was. And then in companies, in terms of the recruitment, sometimes we look at job ads and they say things like short stature, or we see segregation at workplaces. So in my home state of Maryland, we see Dominicans are recruited for cleaning jobs, and in the same hotels you have Eastern Europeans working at the front desk. And so in the fairs, again, Mexicans operating and putting together the fair rides, where white South Africans are doing more people-facing jobs. So just race does play a big front and it's role, and it's something that we should be thinking about. And then also just really quickly in terms of the lack of power, I just want to paraphrase my friend Monica Ramirez, who said migrants are very powerful, and they've been organizing and winning changes and innovating for decades. And unfortunately, the structure of our policies right now give employers sort of control over that process. But there are really exciting efforts that are happening where migrant workers themselves are co-designing solutions and advancing justice in recruitment. And they should be good examples that we look to.
Good, yeah, and I would just note that there are some examples of work that we've done in various supply chains around the world where when you really prioritize talking to the workers, particularly in their communities of origin, they will tell you where products are made or grown. They can revolutionize the way companies understand their own supply chain. So we've had corporate clients that thought that they had, you know, a set of these 28 suppliers and then realized they had something like 79 with lots of problems. So there are lots of ways that you can prioritize the input of workers to also get a better understanding, as well as some of these really new, interesting technological innovations in tracing. Also a way to ask companies, what are they doing to trace their supply chain around quality, transportation, other kind of technical questions, and see if the efforts put into that are also being used to trace the labor chain. Other questions? Ben in the back there.
Sure. I wonder if any of you could call out by name any good organizations, social enterprises that do ethical recruitment. This is something that everybody talks about, but when we engage in our investigations, we often hear, okay, what do you want us to do? Where are the best practices here? So I wonder, this is maybe directed towards Alex or Sean probably.
Sure. So first I might just want to clarify the question if I can, to say ethical recruitment, meaning at the recruiter level, the recruitment agencies. Sure. So, if I'm honest to start, it's a great point. It's a great question. I think for the last few years, we've been talking about carrots and sticks, how to get people by not just threatening punishment, but by engaging. And so one of the slides that I presented was on the responsible recruitment program. And really at its core, it was trying to address this, which was trying to create a market, trying to create a variety of providers that would do this and getting them through it. And I think as the team entered that process, they were learning first there was a large gap in what the standards were and the actual practices. And it does take time. It was not an immediate situation where change happened overnight. It's been getting them to come on board. But without speaking directly to those in the group, I know that over time through the roundtables, through the leadership group and other organizations, we've talked to some agencies that have tried to adopt a model, and they have given some of the feedback to say, we now need the business to sustain it. And I think that's a key message that I've heard. So to say, I can't necessarily point you right now to a website, and maybe I can talk to others and to see if there's anyone who maybe can, but I'm going to be a little doubtful there to say, I think on one hand, we're going to see people that are moving towards that, but we're also going to need them to be sustained with business coming at the same time. So I guess to say to be continued kind of for that point, but it's a great question, and it's something we should be including in our discussions, not just about who we select as suppliers, but who we select as the agents that are working with our suppliers.
Okay, other questions? David?
I have one example,
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate given the number of recruiters that we're documenting. But in the seafood industry, for example, in Maryland, 10 years ago, we interviewed the women working in that industry, and 100% of them had been charged fees. And today, we're hearing from the women that they're no longer being charged fees, and that really came from the industry association in Maryland that convened its employers and really worked with the local recruiter to ensure that the companies were paying the fees. And what happened there was that there was a real threat with respect to access to the visas, and so the political threat was real for the association and for the companies, and so they did put pressure on their local recruiter and ensure that she was compensated when she was doing the recruitment. Because one thing that I had mentioned to someone earlier today is oftentimes we find when we're deposing employers or when we're looking at the relationships between employers and their recruiters, oftentimes those contracts don't provide for compensation for the local recruiter. And so if you're not providing compensation, then where is the money coming from? But there are examples where, in specific industries where there's been some pressure brought to bear.
I would just add, since you asked, Ben, that the numbers are few and far between, and there are recruiters that try to do it without charging fees that have gone out of business because there isn't the demand. I would say that this is a key market issue, and obviously there are a lot of people looking at it, but I think, again, looking at it from an investor perspective, if you're dialoguing with companies you own on this, an answer that there aren't enough out there isn't good enough. The issue is, okay, how are you evaluating between those that don't meet perfect standards but are trying? What are you doing to encourage better behavior among them? How are you engaging with various efforts that are trying to incentivize better behavior and that sort of thing? So it's not just, let's wait till there's a long list, a so-called white list of ethical recruiters, because it's going to be a ways before they're there. And also to certify recruiters as ethical is going to cost even more than certifying a factory. And of course, there can be problems around certification, but so it's really important for people not to just wait until there's a so-called white list, because it's going to be a while before there are a lot of them available.
Yeah, and I would add this, with the role of public policy being important, because we are learning from IREX, one of our Walmart.org grantees, is a labor recruiter, we say there's good ones and bad ones. They're all operating under different laws, and they're operating across borders. So what's permissible, maybe fees are permissible coming from some places and not. So they're going to operate within the boundaries of those laws. So they may be what we deem good in one jurisdiction and what we would deem not as good in another jurisdiction, but they're all complying with the law. So, if fees are allowed in this country to a certain extent and they allow those fees, then, what we're calling a good or bad operator is different in different jurisdictions. So there's a role for that clarity around fees and what fees are permissible, and to work towards that common understanding of what good looks like, which I think that through the certification, through IOM and different RBA is moving in that direction.
Okay, thanks. David?
So we're going to have to end this part. We're going to be leaving at 12:30, but we want to hear from John Morrison. Thank you very much. John Morrison, some thoughts, because clearly this has been really a great panel, and thank you. Let's clap. Please. And while we see so many themes that are common to both of the panels and so many challenges that still exist, we see this as an opportunity to have a conversation that shouldn't end here, but come up with some action plans. So as the investor community interacts more directly with companies, with some of the trade associations that are moving, et cetera, and of course the leadership group really has helped to organize us. But thanks so much. And John, last word.
Thanks, David. Thank you to everybody. Reflections from my side. I think it's been a really good discussion. It's been good to see so many of you in the room physically and so many of you online. For those of us who worked too long on this agenda, it does feel a bit like a tipping point, but I think those of you who work in investment know that this is still a very small bubble. We're nowhere near where the climate bubble is, and that bubble's not big enough. So let's not kid ourselves that we are anywhere near the tipping point, really. A phrase that we've been using all week in our various events is Kevin's phrase, I think, robust, aggressive pace, Kevin. And I think that's what we need. Sean, sorry, Sean.
We can all use it.
We can all use it. Everybody in the room can now use the phrase #robust, aggressive pace. Look, it's really shocking, actually, when you think about this in terms of money as well, that the loss to remittances is as big as international development aid writ large. Isn't that a shock? That actually we, on the one hand, OECD countries are still giving aid and benevolence, and yet are propagating an economic model that is just taking the money away again and is fuel criminal networks and therefore costs on law enforcement and other things. We need to talk about this in those terms to really get the government attention and investor attention we need. I liked what Killian said here. I think let's just assume that workers are paying these fees, unless a business can show that through prevention or remedy that has been minimized or perhaps doesn't exist. In many corridors around the world, we know this is so systemic that the starting place here should be an assumption it's happening, not an assumption that it's only happening once we have an investigative journalist or somebody else uncovering it. This is one of these systemic issues where it is in every global supply chain, particularly those that touch high-risk areas of the world, and we will assume it's there unless it can be shown that it isn't. And that has to be the starting point. But to get to that place, we have a real problem around disclosure and transparency. I mean, why would you, as the legal counsel of a company, disclose everything you're doing on this agenda when public opinion, political opinion, journalists, etc., perhaps are 10 or 20 years behind in their understanding that this is actually in everybody's supply chain? And leadership means not standing forward and saying we have a clean supply chain. Leadership is we have this in our supply chain, and this is what we're doing about it. And if you look at the UK's modern slavery acts, statements, for example, 20,000 companies, we believe, although we still don't know categorically, captured by the Act. Look at those modern slavery statements. How many of them mention recruitment and recruitment fees? Even the companies we know have a sophisticated understanding of this. They're not disclosing what they're doing around recruitment because at the moment, most legal counsels and companies will say there's not enough of an incentive for them to do so. This is where everybody in this room, civil society, business, investors, and those not in the room, particularly governments, need to educate and set a level playing field where if we're really going to get into this and make a difference, we just need to be honest. Yeah? So the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment, 3 years into a 10-year journey, will we have eliminated this globally by 2026? Sean, everybody? We will. Sure we will, right? But as I think Adam and Killian and others have said, we've got to do a lot more than we're doing at the moment if we're going to really make a kick at it. So the Leadership Group, we look at this in 3 ways. Demand, we've got to grow demand for responsible recruitment through global supply chains, but also through public procurement. So when we were with the US government yesterday, we were reminding the US government of the 5 Eyes commitments made at the UN a year and a bit ago, and other commitments that other governments have made to put this into public procurement. We want to see that happening. It's got to happen. Supply, the question from the audience about why is it there are just 5 ethical recruitment agencies that we all talk about all over the world when we're in this conversation? We've really got to work out what's bottlenecking supply, why the major recruiters don't move into this market, and why so many local recruiters around the world do not believe there are the right incentives for them to charge no fees in jurisdictions when they're allowed to, and sometimes in jurisdictions where they're not allowed to, but they still do. And then the third pillar of our work has to be protection for the workers themselves, including the provision of remedies around fees and other types of remedy. So we do hope that you'll follow us and join the journey. We have the next Global Forum for Responsible Recruitment this year will be in Madrid, Spain, with the International Labour Organization and the International Organization for Migration. So please join that in June, if you can, where we try to bring the wider community together around demand, supply, protection. And we do hope that there will be an increasing voice of investors at that meeting and at subsequent meetings and the wider finance community, as has been noted. I'd just like to thank you all again. Thank the Investor Alliance for Human Rights and the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility for being our co-hosts, and Clifford Chance again, and stay with us on this journey. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.